Kale groaned as he forced his eyes open. Sunlight spilled across the room, sharp enough to make him squint. A dull ache throbbed behind his eyes, slow but persistent, like something was drilling into his skull. "I feel like shit." His voice came out dry. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling before his gaze slowly drifted across the room. It wasn't anything special, just a regular bedroom. A bed, a wardrobe tucked into the corner, and at the far end, a sleek gaming setup that looked far more expensive than everything else combined. The rest of the room told a different story, though. Clothes were flung across the floor. Snack wrappers littered the desk and corners. An old pizza box sat open near the wall, the smell faint but unpleasant enough to linger in the air. Kale groaned again as a sharp pain shot through his head. He turned away from the light, dragging a hand through his messy brown hair and gripping it slightly. What happened last night? His memory felt off, foggy, like something was there, but just out of reach. And why does my body feel like I got beaten up? Every part of him ached. His muscles felt heavy, sore in a way that didn't match a normal night. It felt as if someone had used him as a punching bag for several hours and then tucked him back into bed. He exhaled slowly. "I need water." Pushing himself up took more effort than expected. His body felt sluggish as he swung his legs off the bed and stood. The moment his foot touched the floor, something shifted beneath it. Slippery. Oh sure. His balance gave out instantly. His body tilted backward before he could react, his hand shooting out to grab onto something. Anything. There was nothing. He fell hard, the back of his head slamming against something solid with a sharp crack. For a brief moment, everything went quiet. Then the pain hit. Not the kind of pain from just hitting your head. This was something else entirely. It exploded inside his skull, violent and overwhelming. Kale's mouth widened, but no sound came out. It felt like something was tearing through his mind, like his skull had been split apart and something unseen was forcing information into it. Images, voices, emotions, all crashing into him at once. Too much. Far too much. He tried to scream, but his throat wouldn't work. He tried to move, to grab his head, but his body refused to respond. All he could do was endure it. The pain stretched on, suffocating, endless. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Kale lay on the floor, chest heaving, his body drenched in sweat. For a moment he couldn't think straight, couldn't even breathe properly. Then his eyes snapped open. Lyra. The name left his mouth before he even realized it. He pushed himself up and rushed toward the door, ignoring the ache in his body. His hand was just about to reach the handle when it swung open. Kale froze. A girl stood there around his age. Brown hair, green eyes. On closer look, their features were similar, almost like reflections, but where his were plain, hers stood out. She was beautiful. Lyra! He didn't hesitate. The moment he saw her, something inside him broke loose. He stepped forward and pulled her into a tight hug. She stiffened instantly. What are you doing?" she said, trying to push him away. "Get off me, Kale. You stink." He barely registered her words. His arms tightened without him realizing it. "You're okay." His voice cracked. "Thank God you're okay." Warm tears slid down his cheeks. Lyra frowned at first, still resisting, but then she paused. Her expression shifted as she noticed his shoulders were shaking and something wet was soaking her back. Is he crying? The irritation faded, replaced by concern. Slowly, she stopped pushing him away and instead placed a hand on his back, patting him gently. "Hey, what's wrong?" Her voice softened. "Did something happen?" Kale tried to speak. I. The words refused to come out properly. His chest felt tight, his thoughts tangled. Yet he couldn't quite explain where those emotions were suddenly flooding in from, why his chest was tightening, or why he was even in tears and acting this way. Lyra watched him for a moment before asking, "Did you have a bad dream?" Kale froze. "A bad dream." He swallowed. "Yeah, a bad dream. Yeah." They stayed like that for a while before he slowly pulled away, putting some distance between them. Silence settled in, thick and awkward. Both of them avoided eye contact. Kale scratched the back of his head, his thoughts racing. Why did I just do that? He opened his mouth to say something, but at the same time, Lyra also spoke. They both stopped. Silence again. Kale cleared his throat. You go ahead. Lyra hesitated slightly before speaking. I just came to tell you, food is ready. Oh. Kale nodded quickly. Okay. I'll be there soon. All right. She turned and left almost immediately, the door shutting behind her. Kale stood there, staring at it. The tension slowly faded, but confusion took its place. What was that? He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. Moments ago, something had forced its way into his head. Not just information, memories. Along with them came emotions. Heavy ones. Pain, loss, loneliness, misery. They hit him before the memories even made sense. And somehow he knew exactly who they were about. Lyra. His chest suddenly started to tighten as he felt a sudden sense of urgency. Like something terrible had happened to her. Like he had lost her. And when she walked in just now, he didn't think. He just moved. Kale clenched his fist. What the hell is going on? As if responding to his thoughts, something surfaced from deep within his mind. Clearer this time. Not fragments. A memory. His memory. But it didn't belong to now. Felt distant. Far away. Years ahead. 20 years to be precise. Kale's breath caught. His face turned pale as sweat gathered on his skin. His pupils trembling. What? His voice came out hollow. What the hell is this? The memories didn't come gently. At first, it was only fragments. A voice here. A face there. A strange feeling he couldn't place. Then, without warning, everything crashed in at once. Kale dropped to the floor, his back pressing against the bed as if it could hold him together. His knees drew up instinctively, palms flat against the cold tiles. His eyes remained open, but he wasn't seeing his room anymore. Instead, he was seeing something else entirely. Lyra at 18, sitting on the worn couch in their living room. A hunter's badge rested proudly on her chest, catching the light as she smiled through her exhaustion. She told him they didn't need to worry about money anymore now she had become a hunter. The memory unfolded vividly in his mind, as if he were reliving it through his own eyes. And in that moment he felt the emotions. Not happiness nor pride, it was rather something darker. Jealousy. The memory shifted, time moving forward like a scene he couldn't pause. Lyra returned from the tower again and again, each time more battered than the last. Bruises, cuts, exhaustion written all over her. Yet she never stopped. She cooked, cleaned, held the house together, and still found the strength to visit their mother at the hospital. And him? He saw himself too, sitting in front of a screen, lost in games day after day, doing nothing, contributing nothing, just existing while everything around him slowly fell apart. The days blurred into years, repeating the same pattern until one day, something changed. That memory was sharper than the rest. Lyra came back worse than usual. This time, she didn't bother hiding her injuries behind oversized clothes and a forced smile. There was anger in her eyes. Real anger, the kind that had been building for a long time. They argued. No, they shouted. Her voice trembled as she told him to at least help. Even a little. She was the one earning, the one suffering, the one carrying everything. The least he could do was not sit around all day. Kale's chest tightened as he heard his own reply. Cold. Harsh. Every word hit harder as the memory replayed. He wanted to stop, to take it back. But it didn't slow down. It just kept going. He felt his chest clench at the words leaving his own mouth. They were cruel words. At the end, Lyra turned away and walked into her room. That was the last time he saw her. Lyra had always been careful. No matter how hard things got, she never entered the tower without recovering first. Sometimes it took weeks, sometimes months, but never less than a few days. Except that time. Maybe she was too angry. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe she was simply tired. She went back into the tower the very next day. And she never came back. The years that followed felt distant and blurred, like watching someone else's life. There was alcohol, regret, and bills piling up faster than he could handle. When the money ran out, he was forced to act. Odd jobs at first, then harder choices. Their mother's medical bills kept rising until they became something he could no longer ignore. So at 25, he made a decision. He became a hunter. It was dangerous, but it paid. Or at least it could. But it was already too late. He had started too late. His potential was gone before he even began. He struggled, survived, barely moved forward while everything else kept slipping through his fingers. His mother died not long after. And years later, so did he. On the 50th floor of the tower. The memories ended there. Kale gasped as he returned to himself, his body soaked in sweat. His chest rose and fell rapidly as he reached for it, expecting pain, expecting something. There was nothing. No wounds. No blood. Just his body whole and untouched. His gaze slowly lifted, taking in the familiar walls of his room. Everything was the same, exactly as it had always been. "I'm here." His voice came out low, uncertain. It had felt too real. Not like a dream or an imagination. It felt like he had just lived 20 years within those short period. His head throbbed as confusion settled in. He felt 18, yet at the same time he felt like a 38-year-old man who had already lived and died. Two sets of memories clashed inside him, both vivid, both real. He let out a slow breath and touched his face, only now realizing he had been crying. "What is this?" No answer came, only silence. Kale closed his eyes briefly before opening them again, something steadier forming beneath the confusion. It didn't matter whether it was a vision, a memory, or a life he had truly lived. If even a small part of it could become reality, then he would stop it. His expression hardened. Everything traced back to one thing: money. If they had money, Lyra wouldn't have needed to become a hunter so early. She wouldn't have pushed herself like that. Their mother wouldn't have been left without proper treatment. It all came back to money. Raw, simple, unforgiving. "I'll change it," he muttered quietly. He knew exactly how to do that. The tower. It was the fastest way to earn and also the most dangerous. But if he wanted to change anything, it was a risk he had to take. In that other life, he had started at 25 when it was already too late. But that wasn't the case now. He was 18. He was at the exact age where potential was sharpest and growth came fastest. Resolve settled in his eyes as he slowly pushed himself to his feet. His legs felt weak, but they held. His gaze swept across his room and paused. Clothes scattered everywhere. Empty wrappers. Old pizza box. Total mess. He stared at it for a moment before letting out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh. "Yeah, let's start here." If he couldn't fix this, then everything else was meaningless. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. 20 minutes later, the room looked different. Not perfect, but clean enough. The window was open, letting fresh air push out the stale smell that had settled in over time. After changing into a fresh set of clothes, Kale stepped out of his room. The house was quiet. Lyra sat at the table halfway through her meal. For a brief moment he just stood there, taking it in. She was real. Alive. Right in front of him. She looked up. Their eyes met. Both of them flinched almost immediately and looked away. Lyra suddenly seemed very focused on her bowl, while Kale scratched the back of his head and walked over to the seat across from her. A bowl was already placed there. He sat down and started eating without a word. Silence filled the space between them. Not comfortable, just awkward and heavy. The soft clink of spoons against bowls was the only sound. Kale kept his gaze on his food, focusing on it for a moment. Then he set the spoon down and broke the silence. "Lyra," he said, looking up. She paused, but didn't lift her head. "I want to register for the hunter exam." For a moment after the words left his mouth, the room went still. Lyra's hand paused halfway to her plate. She didn't react immediately, like she hadn't fully processed what he said. Then slowly, she looked up, her eyes meeting his. Kale caught it right away. That slight shift beneath her calm. A flicker of unease, almost like she was bracing herself. He didn't get the chance to study it for long. "You know registration ends today, right?" she said, her voice steady but not quite relaxed. Kale nodded. "I know." A brief silence followed before Lyra spoke again, hesitating just a little. "Kale, I just finished paying off Mom's hospital bills. I don't really have any money on me right now." Kale blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't even asked for money. He only wanted to tell her. But as the silence stretched, something else surfaced in his mind. Old memories, uncomfortable ones, excuses, lies, all the times he had cornered her into giving him money. His grip on the spoon tightened before loosening again. "I've really been an asshole." The thought came out bitter. When he looked at her again, that same look was still in her eyes. Not just nervousness but expectation. Like she was waiting for him to snap, to turn this into something ugly. The old him probably would have. Kale swallowed whatever words had been rising earlier and lowered his gaze back to his food. Lyra did the same, and the room settled into a quiet that wasn't comfortable, but not loud either. Just heavy. They ate like that until both plates were empty. Kale stood first, picking up the bowls without a word and heading to the sink. The sound of running water filled the silence as he washed them clean. Lyra didn't move. When he was done, he dried his hands and turned toward his room, taking a few steps before stopping. Something made him glance back. Lyra was still seated, watching him, that same mix of shock and uncertainty on her face. He exhaled quietly. "By the way, I wasn't asking you for money. I won't be doing that anymore. I just thought I should let you know. As for the registration fee, I'll handle it myself." He didn't wait for a response. Turning away, he walked into his room and closed the door behind him. The silence followed. Lyra hadn't said anything. Maybe she was too surprised. Maybe she didn't believe him. Either way, it didn't matter right now. Kale sat on the edge of his bed and let out a slow breath. From now on, he would fix things. Not with words, but with actions. That was the only thing that would matter in the end. His gaze drifted as memories surfaced. At some point, things had gone wrong between them. He couldn't even tell when. They used to be close, too close even. Twins who couldn't spend a single day apart. Then somewhere along the line, things changed. Lyra grew into herself, into her looks, while he stayed the same. Average. Forgettable. What started as envy had slowly, quietly, turned into something uglier. He let out a quiet sigh, dragging a hand down his face. "Stupid kid," he muttered, his voice sounding like a tired elder scolding a naughty child they still loved. Shaking his head, he pushed the thoughts aside and looked around the room. The window was open, letting in fresh air, and the stale smell had faded a little. His eyes landed on the setup in the corner. For a moment he just stared at it. The sleek monitor, the tower, everything neatly arranged. A faint ache stirred in his chest. "Sorry," he muttered under his breath. "But something's gotta go." He picked up his phone and began photographing everything before listing them online. The monitor, the system unit, every accessory. All of it. They were good pieces too, recent models he had spent months putting together. With Lyra's money. The thought made him wince. Yeah. Definitely an asshole. He priced everything lower than it should be. He didn't have time to wait for the best offer. He needed cash and fast. Once he was done, he set the phone aside and stood up. If he wanted to pass the hunter exam, this body needed work. Luckily, the memories in his head weren't useless. He remembered a few solid workout routines. Efficient ones. That was enough. He started simple. Push-ups, core work, basic drills. It didn't take long before his muscles started burning, but he pushed through, forcing his body to keep going. By noon, sweat clung to his skin and his breathing had grown heavier. Only then did he reach for his phone again. Just like he expected, the listings had blown up. Messages, offers, buyers ready to pick up immediately. He skimmed through them and chose the fastest options. Instant payment, instant pickup. Within an hour, everything was gone. His room felt emptier. Too quiet. Kale ignored that and checked his bank balance. 30,000. A A small smile tugged at his lips. The registration fee was around 10K. That left him with 20K. Not much, but not small either. He opened the Hunter Association website and went straight to the registration page. Payment first, then the form. Basic details. Name, age, background. He filled everything in without hesitation. A few taps later, it was done. Registered. All that was left now was to wait. His eyes drifted back to his balance. 20K. He thought about it for a moment. Gear for the exam would take at least half. The remaining. Cale didn't hesitate. He opened his banking app and typed in Lyra's account number. 10K. Sent. He stared at the screen for a second before setting the phone down. It rang almost immediately. Lyra. He picked up. What was that? Her voice burst through. You sent me money? Cale leaned back slightly. Yeah. My contribution for the house. Is there a problem? Silence followed. A few seconds passed before she spoke again. Quieter this time. Where did you get it from? I sold the setup. The setup. Her voice rose again. You mean you're... I've got to go. Cale cut in. Need to train. He ended the call before she could press further. For a moment, he stood there. Then a small smile slipped through. He set the phone aside and stretched his arms. The exam was coming, and he still had a lot to prepare before then. The days that followed settled into a steady rhythm. Wake up, run, train, eat, sleep, then do it all again. Cale had no gym membership, no equipment, no trainer. He didn't have the money for any of that, and frankly, he didn't need it. He had the apartment building stairwell, the park 2 streets over, and 20 years of accumulated knowledge about exactly what a body needed before it could fight anything worth fighting. So he used all 3 every single day. The changes weren't dramatic. Nothing that would turn heads or earn second glances. But they were there. The small things came easier now. Movements that had left him winded a week ago barely registered. His grip was steadier, his footwork cleaner. The deep ache that used to settle into his legs after a run now fading faster than it arrived. Small things. But small things added up. And the changes didn't stop at his body. Something else, quieter and more fragile, began to shift as well. Lyra. Their meals were still mostly silent, awkwardly so. She still moved carefully around him, like she was afraid of stepping on something unseen, but it wasn't the same as before. He noticed it in the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. The fear was still there, but now there was something else mixed into it. A faint, cautious hope, as if she was waiting to see whether this version of him would last or fade away like something temporary. Cale noticed it, and it mattered more than he expected. The change was small, barely there, but it was real, and that was enough to keep him going. He would fix this. No matter how long it took, no matter how slow or awkward it felt. He swore to mend what he had broken. And like that, days slipped past without him noticing, one blending into the next until suddenly, it was time. The Hunter exam. Cale woke before dawn and got ready without hesitation. He moved quietly, dressing in the gear he had prepared the day before. Nothing impressive. A set of worn leather armor from a second-hand hunter supply shop, softened by use but still sturdy. His boots were solid, the soles reinforced enough to handle rough ground, and a pair of light gauntlets fit snugly around his hands without restricting movement. He flexed his fingers once, then again, making sure they responded the way he needed. No weapons. Too expensive. He would deal with that later. When he stepped out of his room, the apartment was quiet. Empty. On the table sat a plate, neatly covered, with a small sticky note beside it. Lyra's handwriting. He picked it up and read it quickly. She had already left, gone ahead to the Hunter Association. Cale paused for a moment before letting out a quiet breath. Right, she was taking the exam too. If it were up to him, he would have stopped her. The life of a hunter wasn't something you stepped into lightly. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and far too easy to lose yourself in. He didn't want that for her. But wanting wasn't enough. Not right now. They needed money, and he didn't have the right to stand in her way when he couldn't offer a better option. His grip tightened slightly on the note before he set it back down. That would change. He would make sure of it. He just needed time to earn enough so she would never have to make choices like this again. Only then could he pull her away from that path without it turning into an argument. Kale ate quickly, then grabbed his things and booked a transit. The ride passed in silence, and when he stepped off, the first thing he saw was the building. The Hunter Association. It stood taller than everything around it, rising above the district like it had something to prove. Clean stone walls and reinforced glass caught the morning light, giving it a presence that felt unshakable. At the entrance stood a signpost bearing a silver emblem, a stylized knight with one hand braced against a massive shield, and the other holding an oversized blade. Beneath it, in sharp block letters, were the words, Hunter Association. Kale stopped for a moment, staring at it. Felt familiar and yet not quite. He let out a quiet breath, then walked in. Inside, the air felt different, almost sterile. There was already a line at the reception desk, not long but steadily growing. Kale joined without a word, counting 9 people ahead of him as he waited. No one talked much, just the occasional shuffle, the faint hum of movement, and the steady tapping of keys from behind the desk. When his turn came, the woman at the front didn't look up. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced ease, her eyes fixed on the screen. Purpose of visit. Hunter exam. Registration number. He gave it and she typed without pause. After a moment, she stopped as if waiting for something to load, then finally looked up. It says here this is your first time taking the exam. Is that correct? Yes. She nodded, already reaching for the desk phone. A short call, a few quiet words, then she hung up. Stepped to the side. Someone will be with you shortly. All right. He moved clear of the desk and let the queue resume behind him. He heard her voice as the next person stepped forward. Purpose of visit. It didn't even sound like a question anymore. With nothing else to do, his thoughts drifted to the exam itself. The exam had 3 stages, the first being the most important. Mana affinity test. It hadn't always been part of the process. That change came after years of mistakes paid for in blood. When the rifts first appeared decades ago, no one understood what they were. They tore open the world and spilled monsters and a strange energy into the atmosphere, something people would later come to call mana. The first response was simple. Fight back. Governments gathered their forces and launched attacks, managing to push the monsters back. Then came the first exploration into a rift, a decision driven more by desperation than understanding. It went badly. Many died. But they also found something. The tower. A massive structure located within those strange worlds. This purpose was a mystery, yet people couldn't resist it. Some reached out to it and vanished, sending waves of panic through those who watched. Hours later, a handful of the missing returned, battered but alive, bringing with them knowledge that would change everything. It turned out the tower wasn't just a structure. It was a trial. Those who touched it were sent into a tutorial, and those who survived awakened powers that defied everything humanity thought it knew. That was the beginning of it all. More rifts appeared after that, each one containing its own world, its own dangers, but always the same tower waiting at the center. People began chasing the power it offered, and just like that, the Age of Hunters began. Over time, the Hunter Association was formed to regulate them. Every year, new candidates took the exam and entered the tower, but many never came back. At first, they thought the tutorial was simply too difficult, so they made the exams harder. It didn't help. The deaths continued until the truth was uncovered years later. Not everyone could handle mana. Some simply lacked the ability to contain it, and when those people entered the tower, they were destroyed. That discovery led to the addition of the first stage of the exam. Mana affinity test. A simple test that saved countless lives. Kale let out a quiet breath as the memory settled. Then a voice cut through his thoughts. Hey, this way. He looked up to see a young man in a Hunter Association uniform standing a few steps away, motioning for him to follow. Kale straightened and stepped forward. It was time. The young staff member led him down a corridor and stopped at a door that looked like any other in the building, pushing it open to reveal a small room. It was clean, almost too clean. White walls, clinical lighting, and nothing else except for a single object resting on a low platform at the center of the room. It looked like a slab of crystal, clear in a way that felt almost unnatural, like looking through still water into nothing. "Place your hand on the surface," the staff member said, gesturing towards it. Kale stepped forward without hesitation and pressed his palm against it. Warmth surged through him instantly, rushing from his hand through his entire body as if something was scanning him from the inside. Then just as quickly, it pulled back, flowing into the slab again. It didn't hurt. It wasn't even uncomfortable, just intrusive. A moment later, the crystal glowed with a soft blue light. The staff member gave a small nod and scribbled something down on his clipboard. "All right, come with me." Kale pulled his hand away and followed. They exited through another corridor, quieter than the last, before stopping in front of another identical door. "This is the waiting room. You'll be called when it's your turn for the next stage. Listen for your registration number." He said nothing after that. The silence itself was the dismissal. Kale took the hint as he nodded and stepped inside. The space opened up far wider than he expected. High ceilings, bright lighting, enough room for a large gathering, though only a portion of it was occupied. He glanced around, counting out of habit. 30 people, maybe a few more, all around his age. A few heads turned when he entered, curious for a moment before looking away again. Kale didn't mind. He moved toward a corner and settled in, letting the silence stretch. It didn't last. Heavy footsteps broke through the stillness. Kale looked up as someone approached. A boy around his age, broad-shouldered with a solid build that hinted at strength without trying. But what stood out wasn't his physique. It was his face. He looked happy. Not just relaxed or friendly, but genuinely, almost strangely happy, as if nothing in the world had ever given him a reason not to be. Their eyes met, and the boy flashed a wide, easy smile. It wasn't forced. Came naturally. "You look green. First time taking the exam?" Kale paused briefly, then nodded. "Yeah, first time." The boy's face split into a grin like a child whose guess had just been confirmed by a trusted adult. "Called it." Then his grin slowly died off as he scratched the back of his head before extending his hand. "My bad. Adam." Kale took it. "Cool name. Kale." "Kale." Adam repeated like he was testing the sound of it. "Sounds good." For a brief second, something in his tone shifted, subtle but noticeable. Is he insecure about his own name or something? Before the thought could settle, Adam was already back to normal. "You seem pretty nervous." Kale blinked. "Nervous?" He was about to respond, but Adam stepped closer and gave him a firm pat on the back, like they'd known each other for years. "Relax. Failing isn't the end of the world. You can always try again next year. It's not a big deal." Kale just stared at him. First of all, who was nervous? And second, who was planning to fail? If anything, his only concern was how well he would perform. His silence seemed to confirm whatever Adam had already decided, because the pats on his back grew even more encouraging. Before Kale could stop him, a voice cut in. "Adam, get away from him. Don't jinx it." Kale turned to see a girl approaching. Blonde hair tied into neat pigtails, light leather armor fitted comfortably over her frame, with gloves, boots, and a bow resting across her back alongside a quiver of arrows. She looked prepared. Adam placed a hand over his chest in mock offense. "Come on, Zoe. I was just encouraging my buddy here." Kale raised a brow. "Buddy?" Zoe didn't look convinced. "You're not encouraging him. You're crowding him." Then she turned to Kale. "Don't mind this airhead. He does this all the time." "I noticed," Kale said. "He seems friendly." "Maybe a little too friendly," she replied. She extended her hand. "Zoe." "Kale." He glanced between them. "You guys seem close." "Pretty much," she said. "We met here last year." Kale raised a brow. "Here? Right here in this room." She nodded toward Adam with a small shrug. "We both sat the exam last year. Both failed. I didn't pass the physical assessment and he struggled with the written test. So we started training together after that, each of us filling in the other's weak spots." She nudged Adam lightly. His idea. Kale chuckled. Looks like it worked. You both seem prepared. Zoe shrugged slightly, while Adam wore a proud grin that she quickly noticed and ignored. What about you? She asked. How long have you been preparing? A few days. Both of them froze. That's reckless, Zoe said. Bold, Adam added. Kale just shrugged. Before they could say more, a loud voice cut through the room. Attention! Everyone turned toward the front as a staff member stepped forward, posture straight and voice firm. I'll be calling registration numbers. When you hear yours, make your way forward. No delay. He began immediately. Numbers echoed across the room one after another. When Adam and Zoe's were called in the same batch, they quickly got ready to leave. See you around, Adam said. Good luck, Zoe added. Kale nodded as they left with the group. The room grew quieter after that, though not for long as new arrivals trickled in. Time passed, slow and steady, until the staff member returned and started calling another set of numbers. Kale's was among them. He stood and joined the group, following them into another room. This one was much smaller, arranged like a classroom with rows of desks. They took their seats as papers were distributed. Kale glanced down. Simple. Strategies for hunting goblins. Common herbs for stopping bleeding. Basic properties of materials. Standard knowledge. For someone with 20 years of hunter's experience etched into his memory, it was almost effortless. He finished within minutes, submitted his paper, and left without hesitation. The next stage awaited. The physical assessment. Or rather, the combat test. Instead of an arena, he was led into a room lined with sleek pods. VR units. The staff helped him set everything up, and the world faded. Then, a vast clearing stretched out around him, surrounded by tall trees swaying gently. A screen flickered into existence in front of him. Welcome to Hunter Exam Stage 3. Please select your weapon. A list appeared. Blades, spears, bows, axes. At the bottom, an option to use a personal weapon. Kale didn't bring any weapon with him, so he selected a standard sword from the option. The next moment light gathered in his hand, forming into shape as the weapon materialized. He gripped it, testing the balance. Not perfect, but usable. Slightly off, enough to strain his wrist if he relied on one hand too much. Still, good enough. The screen flashed again. Stage 3 beginning. First monster wave in 5. Kale adjusted his stance, tightening his grip as his breathing slowed and his focus sharpened. The countdown ticked down in silence. Time to see if the past few days' training had been enough. The countdown hit 0. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then the forest shifted. The forest ahead of him rustled, and a figure stepped out from the undergrowth. Small, green, barely over 3 feet tall. A goblin. It wore nothing but a tattered strip of cloth around its waist. Its dull green skin stretched over a wiry but defined frame, and its long ears twitched at the slightest sound. In its hand was a crude dagger carved from bone, the blade stained dark from repeated use. Blood, dirt, and some other grime which had long since buried its original color. The goblin tilted its head, then its eyes locked onto him. Yellow, sharp, and filled with mischief. A low growl slipped from its throat. Kale let out a quiet breath, rolling his shoulder once to loosen up. Of course they'd make them this real. Memories surfaced without effort. Goblins were common, weak on paper, usually found within the first 10 floors of the tower. But weak didn't mean harmless. People died to these creatures all the time, not because of strength, but because of how they fought. They ambushed. They set traps. They fought dirty. And their blades, they were poisoned. Extracts from plants, crushed insects, whatever they could find. Even a shallow cut could be enough. The toxin would seep in, slow you down, then they'll finish you off while you struggle to move. Kale knew all of it. He had lived it. 50 floors worth of experience sat quietly in his mind. Battles against hordes, close calls, the exact rhythm of how these creatures moved and killed. The only thing he lacked now was a body that could keep up. Still, a faint smile touched his lips. Come on then. He raised his sword, grip steady. "Let's see the stuff you're made of." The goblin shrieked and lunged, dagger aimed low toward his midsection. Just like he expected, Kale didn't rush. He waited. At the last second, he shifted just enough for the blade to miss him by a hair. The motion was tight and controlled. Then he moved. A single clean swing. The goblin's head separated from its body before it even realized it had missed. The body dropped, twitching once before going still. Kale exhaled slowly, his hand tingling from the impact. Right? No flashy moves. A faint light flickered as a screen appeared before him. First wave cleared. Next wave begins in 10. The goblin's corpse dissolved into particles of light, and the forest fell quiet again. Then two figures stepped out. This time they didn't hesitate. Both goblins charged immediately. Kale narrowed his eyes as they split on approach. One came straight at him while the other curved wide to his left, trying to box him in. But he didn't give them a chance to succeed. He moved first, stepping toward the one on the left before it could complete its arc. The sudden pressure threw off its timing completely. A sharp kick to its wrist sent its dagger flying, and before it could recover, Kale drove the pommel of his sword into its temple. The goblin dropped instantly. He didn't stop. Using the momentum, he turned just as the second goblin reached him. Its blade came in fast, but Kale caught it on the flat of his sword and pushed it aside, redirecting the strike past him. Then he stepped in and drove his blade into its side. The goblin choked and collapsed. Kale pulled his sword free and let out a breath. 2 down. The screen returned. Second wave cleared. Next wave begins in 15. The bodies vanished, replaced by 3 more goblins. Kale adjusted his stance, rolling his shoulders again. A small smile crept onto his face. Now it's getting interesting. The waves continued. 3 became 4. 4 became 5. Each round pushed him harder, forcing him to think faster, move cleaner, and manage his position carefully. He never let them fully surround him, always cutting through their formation before it closed. At least at first. By the 8th wave, his breathing had grown heavier. Sweat clung to his skin, and his limbs felt just a little slower than before. 8 goblins circled him now, their yellow eyes watching, waiting. Normally, he would have broken their formation before it tightened. This time, he was just a fraction too late. They closed in. Kale's jaw clenched as they moved all at once. He cut one down, dodged another, but something slipped through. A sharp pain exploded in his back. He staggered. TCH. He turned and cut down the one behind him, but it was already done. The toxin spread fast, far too fast. His limbs grew heavy, his grip weakening as the poison took hold. Another goblin lunged. He tried to move, but his body didn't respond in time. The blade slid across his neck. Everything went still. A screen appeared before him. Candidate eliminated. Simulation ending. The forest dissolved into light. Kale's eyes snapped open as the pod hissed and unlocked. For a moment he just sat there, breathing steadily. 8 waves. Not bad, but not enough. He stepped out of the pod, his gaze briefly sweeping across the room. Some of the other pods were now occupied. It seemed others from his batch had begun finishing their written exam as well. He looked away. Didn't matter. The staff member who had brought him earlier stood nearby, jotting something down on a clipboard before glancing up. "Come with me." Kale followed him back to the front desk. The setup was the same as before. A small queue in front of the counter, the same woman seated behind it. The staff member leaned in and spoke to her in a low voice. She nodded, typed something quickly, and he left without another word. The woman's gaze remained on her screen for a few seconds before she looked up at Kale. "Congratulations. You passed the hunter exam on your first attempt. Not many manage that. You should be proud." Kale simply nodded. Behind him, however, the reaction was different. The people in the queue shifted, whispers starting to spread. Everyone there understood what that meant. Passing on the first try placed him among a very small percentage. He ignored them. "All relevant information has been sent to your registered email," the woman continued, sliding an ID card across the desk. It looked simple, his image and basic details printed on its surface, but Kale knew better. The card was layered with complex magical encoding, making it impossible to forge. He picked it up, his eyes settling on his rank. F+. A small nod followed. Not bad. From what he remembered, the highest achievable rank before awakening was E. This was solid. Seeing him examine it, the woman added, "This ID includes a 1-week rift permit. You can access any rift under the Hunter Guild within your rank or below. Some sections are still incomplete. After your awakening, you can return for reassessment to update your information." She paused briefly. "Of course, you may keep certain details private if you wish, unless you plan to register as an official hunter under the association." Kale listened, then nodded once. Standard procedure. He slipped the card into his hand and looked back at her. "Where's the nearest rift I can access with my rank?" Kale walked out of the Hunter Association without looking back. He hadn't missed the scowl still lingering on the desk lady's face. She had tried to convince him to wait, to take more time and prepare properly before stepping into a rift for the first time. He listened to her, then brushed her off politely. She probably saw him as reckless now, maybe even an idiot. It didn't bother him. He wasn't walking in unprepared. The past few days hadn't just been about passing the exam. He had trained with the tower tutorial in mind, pushing himself to adjust as quickly as possible. At some point, more preparation would just be wasted time. It wouldn't make any real difference. So why waste time? He booked a transit and began his journey toward the Mash World, the name of the rift he was headed to. The ride was quiet. Kale leaned back slightly and pulled out his phone, checking the notification he had received earlier. Just as the desk lady had said, there was an email from the Hunter Association waiting for him. He opened it and skimmed through the contents. Rules, guidelines, survival tips. The usual. Most of it was information he already knew before the exam. He didn't linger on it. Scrolling down, he found a link at the bottom and tapped it. The Hunter Association website loaded up, clean and structured. It connected all registered hunters, filled with reports, discussions, and shared information. Kale signed in using his newly issued ID and was taken to the homepage, but he didn't stay there long. He went straight to the forum. His fingers moved quickly as he searched for anything related to the Mash World. It didn't take long for results to appear. Thread after thread filled the screen. He opened one. The Mash World, also known as the Poison Marsh. A rift filled with toxic swampland where even the air itself could be deadly over time. Protective gear wasn't optional. It was necessary. He kept scrolling. The most common creatures were mud slimes. They hid within the marsh, blending perfectly with their surroundings before attacking without warning. Their attacks were corrosive enough to melt through flesh, and several comments warned against taking them lightly. Kale read through everything without reacting. He had no intention of underestimating anything, especially not creatures inside a rift. If anything, experience had already taught him how deceptive these places could be. Rift rankings, for example, were far from straightforward. Most people assumed that lower-ranked rifts were safer, but that wasn't entirely true. Two major factors determined a rift's ranking. The first was exploration. Newly discovered rifts were usually classified at higher ranks because of the unknown risks. Only after thorough exploration would their true difficulty be reassessed. The second was environmental and behavioral factors. Terrain, monster patterns, and overall conditions played a role. A rift could be ranked lower not because it was harmless, but because its dangers were predictable and manageable. The Mash World was one of those cases. The toxic air could be dealt with using basic protective masks. The mud slimes, while dangerous, were mostly passive and stayed within their territories. As long as a hunter didn't wander into areas beyond their level, the risk remained relatively low. But that didn't mean it was safe. Underestimating a rift based on its rank was one of the fastest ways to die. Kale locked his phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He had gathered enough information. Looking out the window, he noticed the scenery had changed. The land had become barren, stripped of life. No vegetation, no movement, nothing but dry, empty ground stretching into the distance. They were getting close. Rifts leaked mana into their surroundings, and over time, it poisoned the environment. The closer one got, the more lifeless everything became. The transit eventually slowed to a stop. Kale stepped out and immediately spotted it. The rift. It looked like a tear carved into reality itself, as though something had sliced the world open. Beyond it lay nothing but darkness, deep and endless. A few hunters stood nearby, gathered in small groups. Most seemed to be waiting for teammates. Kale walked past them without paying any attention and headed straight for the rift. The moment he stepped through, his body reacted violently. A powerful force pulled at him from every direction, distorting his senses and throwing off his balance. For a brief moment, it felt as if he was being dragged out of reality itself. Then it stopped. Just like that, Kale steadied himself and opened his eyes. His surroundings had completely changed. He now stood inside a massive hall. Before he could take in more, two figures in heavy gear approached him. Their equipment was well maintained, clearly belonging to experienced hunters. One of them stopped at a distance while the other stepped forward. "ID," he said. Kale handed it over without hesitation. The man scanned it with a handheld device, his expression shifting slightly as he read the result. "You're a new hunter?" he asked. Kale nodded. "Just passed the exam." The man paused for a moment, then gave a small nod. "All right." He signaled to his partner, who immediately left the hall. "Your guide will be here soon," he added, returning the ID. Kale stepped aside, moving away from the entrance while the guard returned to his position. After a short wait, the second guard came back with someone else. The man who approached was broad-shouldered and well-built, but his expression carried a hint of surprise, as if he hadn't expected this situation. His eyes quickly found Kale. "You're the new hunter?" he asked. Kale nodded again. "Yeah, just got my license." The man let out a quiet breath, almost amused. "Didn't expect someone to jump in this quickly." "I understand," Kale replied calmly. The man relaxed slightly. "Name's Teras." "Kale." "All right, Kale. Come with me." Teras turned and led the way out of the hall. As they stepped outside, a massive city came into view. High walls surrounded it, and rows of buildings stretched across the area in an organized layout. From the way everything was structured, it was clear this wasn't just a normal city built for settlement. It was a fortress. "This is standard for controlled rifts," Teras explained as they walked. "The entrance works both ways. Monsters can come through just as easily as we do, so we build around it." He chuckled lightly. "And people aren't exactly predictable either." Kale observed everything quietly. Despite being inside a rift, the city felt alive. Shops, inns, restaurants. Hunters moved around, some preparing, others resting or trading. "The air here is toxic over time," Teras continued. "You can stay for a while, but long-term exposure isn't a good idea unless you've got support like potions or a healer." He suddenly glanced at Kale. "You don't have a mask?" Kale shook his head. "I was planning to get one here." Teras laughed. "Good thinking. You'll get one anyway. First-time entry, the association provides it." He looked back at Kale with a grin. "Still, I've got to say, you've got guts. Most new hunters take time after their first real fight with monsters in the simulation during the exam." He paused slightly, eyeing him. "But you came straight in." Kale listened and kept his expression neutral. Teras was chatty. That tracked. A guide who couldn't hold a conversation would be a poor guide by definition. And Kale had the quiet thought that it probably wasn't in his best interest to mention that the money had factored fairly heavily into his decision to move this fast. Some things were better left unsaid. Teras continued talking as they moved through the city, pointing out key places along the way. Everything functioned like a normal city, just built within a far more dangerous environment. Eventually, they entered another building. "Transport," Teras said. "Flying mounts." Kale glanced around as he took it in. "No flying monsters in this rift," Teras added. "Makes air travel the fastest option. Still risky if you don't know what you're doing. Some slimes can attack from farther than you'd expect." He handled the arrangements quickly. Before long, a massive bird was brought out, resembling an eagle but far larger. It shifted its wings slightly, its sharp eyes observing them. "Fastest you'll get here," Terra said. They mounted it, and with a powerful beat of its wings, the creature lifted into the air. The city shrank beneath them, replaced by the endless stretch of toxic marsh. And somewhere ahead, still distant but closing, was the tower. The wind roared past them, sharp and relentless. It pressed against Kale's body with enough force to make breathing difficult, each gust clawing at him as if trying to tear him off the mount. Even with Terras seated ahead, subtly diverting most of the pressure, the ride was still brutal. The eagle-like beast flew at a terrifying speed, its massive wings cutting cleanly through the air. Kale tightened his grip, fingers digging into the coarse feathers beneath him, steadying himself as best as he could. "First time flying?" Terras called out, his tone relaxed, almost amused. Kale almost lost his balance at the question. For a split second, he wondered if Terras was serious. Where exactly was someone like him supposed to have seen a bird like this before, let alone ride one? He swallowed the response that came to mind. Right now, staying on was a bigger priority than answering stupid questions. He tightened his grip instead, forcing his focus back on the ride. Ahead of him, Terras guided the mount with practiced ease, adjusting their direction without hesitation or wasted movement. For all his questionable intelligence, his skill as a guide was undeniable. Kale couldn't help but admit that much. Time passed quickly. At some point, Kale noticed it. At first, it was just a thin shape in the distance, barely noticeable against the horizon. But as they got closer, it began to grow, and it didn't stop, until it towered over everything. The structure pierced the sky like a blade driven into the world. Its surface was dark, almost like obsidian, yet different. It didn't reflect light the way it should. Instead, it seemed to swallow it. Even from afar, it felt heavy, oppressive. Terras guided the beast into a descent, circling once before landing at its base. Kale stepped down, his boots settling against the cold stone platform at the tower's base. For a moment, he didn't move. His gaze lifted slowly, tracing the structure upward as far as his eyes could follow before it disappeared into the clouds. "It's big, huh?" Terras said casually. Kale let out a quiet breath, his gaze still fixed upward. "That's one way to put it." Terras smirked, like he had a joke in mind but chose not to say it. Instead, he clapped his hands together lightly, brushing them off. "Well, this is where I leave you." Kale glanced at him. "Place your hand on the surface," Terras continued, nodding toward the tower. "You'll be transported inside. That's where your tutorial begins." He paused for a moment before continuing. "As for me, I stay here. Standard procedure." "How long?" Kale asked. 12 hours, Terras replied. "No recorded tutorial has gone past that. If you're not out by then." He gave a small shrug, leaving the rest unsaid. The meaning was clear. Kale nodded once. "Got it." Terras studied him for a moment, then gave a small grin. "Good luck." "Thanks." Kale turned and walked toward the tower. Up close, it felt even stranger. The surface was perfectly smooth, unnaturally so, without a single flaw or imperfection. He hesitated for a brief moment, then placed his hand against it. The response was immediate. A crushing pressure slammed down on him, far heavier than anything he had ever experienced. His breath caught as the force wrapped around his body, pressing into him from all sides. It wasn't just weight. It felt like judgment. He couldn't move, couldn't think. The familiar sensation of being pulled into another space never came. There was only pressure, suffocating and absolute. Then it vanished. Kale staggered slightly as his lungs dragged in air, his surroundings shifting before he could fully recover. The world was gone. In its place stretched an endless expanse of gray, empty and silent. Before he could take it in, a massive screen appeared. "Welcome, Challenger. Your tutorial is about to begin. Please select your weapon." Weapon choices filled his vision. Swords, spears, bows, daggers. Countless choices laid out before him, along with the option to use his own equipment. Kale's expression shifted slightly. It was clear the simulation from the Hunter Association exam had been modeled after the tower. But a copy was still just a copy. There was a clear difference. The exam had been controlled, safe. This, on the other hand, was real. If he died here, there would be no waking up. Kale didn't hesitate. Sword. A flash of light formed in his hand, steel taking shape instantly. The weight settled naturally into his grip, familiar and reassuring. Another screen appeared. Selecting tutorial scenario. The gray space warped. Reality twisted, then reformed. A ruined city replaced it. Collapsed buildings stretched in every direction. Smoke rising into the sky. The air felt heavy, suffocating. Then the smell reached him. Burning flesh. Kale's expression hardened slightly. Behind him, a dark humanoid figure materialized. Stood perfectly still, not moving, not reacting. Just there. Another screen lit up. Tutorial mission. Protection. Objective. Defend the designated target against incoming waves and survive as long as possible. Target designated. Kale turned. The dark humanoid figure stood there completely motionless. It didn't react. Didn't even seem aware of its surroundings. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Of all the trial types, this was the worst for him. Most hunters would prefer a mission like this. It was manageable, predictable, and comes with no real risk of death. But Kale needed a high rating, and that meant control. This kind of trial gave him very little of that. Anyone who had ever played a video game with an escort mission would understand exactly how he felt right now. The kind where you're perfectly capable of handling the enemies in front of you, but the NPC you're protecting has apparently never once in their life considered the concept of self-preservation. The kind that exists purely to make everything harder while contributing absolutely nothing in return. Still, there was no point complaining now. The trial had already begun. Two masked figures appeared ahead of him, daggers glinting faintly under the sun. The first one charged immediately. Kale stepped to the side, blade rising to intercept, but the second slipped past him, heading straight for the target. Of course, Kale moved instantly, grabbing the humanoid figure and pulling it out of the way just as the dagger sliced through empty air. The first assassin struck from behind. Kale twisted, raising his sword in time to block. Steel clashed sharply as he redirected the attack, stepping forward in the same motion and driving his blade into the assassin's abdomen. The body dropped. The second attacker was already closing in again. Kale parried the strike, then slammed the hilt of his sword into the man's face. The impact staggered him just long enough for Kale to finish it with a clean thrust through the chest. 2 down, but there was no time to settle into it before 2 more appeared in quick succession. Kale frowned slightly. Their numbers hadn't changed. He had expected the waves to scale differently, maybe more enemies like in the simulation from the Hunter Association exam. But the moment the new enemies moved, he understood. They weren't stronger in the usual sense. They were better. Their movements were sharper now, more precise. Every strike carried intent. Every feint was harder to read. Like the basic patterns from before had been stripped away. Kale adjusted immediately, forcing himself to keep up. Wave after wave came without rest. No breaks, no breathing room. The pressure built steadily, the assassins growing more refined with each appearance. Until eventually, he couldn't keep up. A blade slipped past his defense, heading straight for his skull. And then everything froze. The ruined city vanished instantly, replaced once again by the endless gray space. The black screen reappeared. Tutorial complete. Assessing performance. Kale stood there, breathing heavily, his gaze locked on the screen as he waited for his rating. Then the screen lit up again. Assessment complete. Performance rating, B+. Proceeding with awakening. Kale exhaled slightly. Not bad. Then the screen flickered. Red. Error. Unknown variable detected. Awakening sequence interrupted. Reassessing performance. Kale's expression changed. What? That wasn't normal. The red glow lingered, heavy and unsettling, as seconds dragged by. Then the screen shifted again. Reassessment complete. New performance rating, SSS. Proceeding with awakening. Kale stared at it, stunned. What the hell is this? Before he could think further, energy surged through him. It flooded his body instantly, overwhelming and intense. It wasn't pain, but it was too much to process, like his body had been plugged into something far beyond its limit. His senses faded. All that remained was the energy coursing through him, reshaping something deep inside. Time blurred. Then slowly it stopped. The energy faded, and his awareness returned. Kale took a breath. Everything felt different, stronger, deeper. There was something new within him, something he couldn't see but could clearly feel. He steadied himself, adjusting to the change, before finally noticing the screen floating in front of him. Awakening complete. Class awakened. Void sovereign. Kale stepped out of the tower, and the world shifted around him. For a brief moment, his senses lagged behind. The air felt different, lighter somehow, and the faint pressure that had wrapped around him inside the tower vanished all at once. It left him slightly unsteady, but he recovered quickly, exhaling as his gaze lifted. Terra's was waiting not far off, leaning lazily against the massive eagle mount. The creature's feathers shimmered faintly in the fading light, its sharp eyes half-lidded as if resting. As though sensing him, Terra's turned, and a grin slowly spread across his face. Well, I'll be damned. You made it. Kale raised an eyebrow as he walked closer. You say that like you didn't expect me to. Terra's shrugged, pushing himself off the eagle. No hard feelings, man. I've been guiding new hunters in this rift for a long time. His tone lost some of its humor. I've seen a lot of new hunters walk in here thinking the tower's just a game, something they can rush through and walk out stronger. His eyes flicked toward the tower behind them. Most of them don't even make it past the tutorial. Kale nodded once. Fair enough. No hard feelings. That seemed to settle it. Terra's gave a small smile. Good. Then let's get moving. They climbed onto the eagle, and within moments the creature launched into the air. Wind rushed past them as the tower shrank behind, the base coming into view soon after. The ride was quiet, but Kale didn't mind. His thoughts were already elsewhere. After landing, he parted ways with Terra's and headed straight for the rift exit. The moment he appeared outside, everything felt calm, almost too calm. The area around the rift was empty, which made sense. The sun was already going down, casting long shadows across the ground. Most hunters had already left. Kale booked a transit and took a seat at the back. As the vehicle moved, city lights slowly came alive outside the window. He leaned back, letting out a quiet breath, and before he realized it, a smile had already formed on his face. Damn, I'm actually overpowered. His mind drifted back to his status. Name, Kale Voss. Title, Class, Void Sovereign. Class perks, Void Absorption, Null Field, Sovereign Claim, Echo Strike. Level, 1, 0%. Health, 406. Mana, 240. Stats. Strength 13. Agility, 10. Endurance, 11. Intelligence, 16. Vitality, 12. Constitution, 15. Stat points, 0. TC balance, 800. Talent, Infinite Reward Multiplier. Class perks, Void Absorption, absorb part of a monster's essence after a kill. Chance to gain a random trait after integration. Null Field, creates a suppressive field within a 3-meter radius that prevents intrusive magical probing. Sovereign's claim once every 24 hours. Claim a random entity within 100 meters. Grants random traits from the claim target. Note: target must be beneath you. Echo Strike, every third hit on the same target detonates a void echo. Current damage, 180% of total damage dealt in sequence. Talent, Infinite Reward Multiplier. All rewards received are subject to multiplication. Multiplier range, x2 to unlimited. Activation. Automatic upon reward receipt. The base stats alone were absurd. From what he remembered, even having a single stat above 10 at the start was considered impressive. Yet all of his had crossed that threshold. And then the class perks. Void absorption was already ridiculous. The ability to gain traits from monsters meant his growth wouldn't be limited in the usual way. Null field was just as valuable in its own right. Status information was supposed to be private, but there were abilities that could pry into it. Having something that blocked that made a huge difference. Sovereign's claim, though, that one was unclear. The condition at the end wasn't specific. What exactly counted as beneath him? Level? Strength? Something else? And the randomness didn't help either. Still, it was something he would figure out with time. Then there was Echo Strike. Kale exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering slightly. That one was on a completely different level. Hunters struggled most with dealing damage. Monsters were naturally stronger, tougher, and harder to bring down. In most teams, the heavy hitters were treated as the core because they made the biggest difference in fights. With a perk like that, he was already set apart. But even that wasn't the most shocking part. His talent, Infinite Reward Multiplier. Talents were rare. Far rarer than skills. And his wasn't just rare, it was absurd. If it worked the way it sounded, then everything changed. Growth, resources, money. None of it would depend on just luck anymore. It would only be a matter of time. The transit slowed to a stop, pulling him out of his thoughts. Kale stepped out and looked up at the old apartment building in front of him. The walls were worn, the paint faded, and the lighting was dim. Home. As he made his way inside and climbed the stairs, a thought settled firmly in his mind. This place wouldn't do for long. Ever since rifts began appearing, livable areas had shrunk, forcing people to settle closer to unstable zones. Places like this were cheap, but they came with risks. Too much ambient mana. Too much exposure. His expression hardened slightly. That was exactly how their mother fell ill. By the time he reached the 4th floor, he had already pushed the thought aside. Light seeped through the cracks of the door, and faint sound could be heard from inside. Lyra was back. Kale stepped in, finding her seated on the couch in her usual loose home where, eyes fixed on the television. At the sound of the door, she turned. "You're back." He nodded, closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching longer than usual. Kale broke it. "How was the exam?" "I passed." "Rank. That's good." He paused briefly. "I passed too. I even cleared the tower tutorial." "What?" She shot up so suddenly it caught him off guard. "You did what?" He started, but she cut him off. "Do you have no regard for your life?" Her voice rose, but it wasn't anger. It was fear. "How could you do something like that without any preparation? Do you even understand how dangerous that is?" "I prepared," Kale said quickly. "I trained. I bought equipment." "That's not enough." She stepped closer and grabbed his hand tightly. Her grip trembled. "Please don't do that again," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what changed your mind or why you suddenly want to become a hunter. But just stop." Kale felt his chest tighten as she continued. "You can stay home. I'll get you a better setup since you like gaming. Just stay in your room and leave everything else to me." Tears were already streaming down her face. "I'm still struggling with Mom's condition. I can't lose you too. Please, just promise me." Kale looked at her, really looked, and for a moment he couldn't say anything. The fear in her eyes, the exhaustion she tried to hide, all of it pressed down on him. Slowly, he pulled his hand free, then stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. She didn't resist. Her body softened instantly as she leaned into him, her quiet tears turning into heavy sobs. Kale said nothing. He simply held her, gently patting her back until her sobs slowly faded. Her breathing grew steady, and before long, her body went limp in his arms. She had fallen asleep. Carefully, he lifted her and carried her to her room, tucking her in before stepping out quietly. As he walked back, her words echoed in his mind. She didn't want to lose him too. which meant she had already given up on their mother. He couldn't blame her. Mana sickness at that stage wasn't something people recovered from. The damage spread slowly through the body, and there was no real cure. Only ways to delay the inevitable. Kale stepped into his room and closed the door behind him, his gaze darkening slightly. 3 months. That was what his memory told him. An elixir would appear at an auction, one rumored to cure any illness. The price, 3 billion credits. For most people it was impossible. Kale sat down slowly, his fingers curling slightly as a faint smile formed on his lips. With this talent. His eyes sharpened. Maybe it isn't. The next morning came quietly. Sunlight crept over the horizon, spilling into the city in soft waves as a new day began. Kale woke earlier than usual, his mind already clear, his body surprisingly light. For a moment he just lay there, staring at the ceiling. Then he got up. The apartment was silent. Lyra wasn't awake yet, which didn't surprise him. After everything from the night before, she needed the rest. Kale moved quietly. He took his bath, got dressed, and stepped out of his room without making unnecessary noise. The living room was empty, and her door was still closed. He paused for a second, then shook his head. No need to wake her. Instead, he grabbed a small sticky note and left it on the fridge. Went out for a bit. I'm fine. Don't worry. Simple. Enough to keep her from panicking. With that, he stepped out of the apartment and headed downstairs. The morning air was still cool as he booked a transit, settling in as it pulled away. Not long after, the vehicle slowed to a stop. Kale stepped out to a familiar sight. The Hunter Association building stood tall before him, a glass and steel structure that dominated the area. Compared to the previous day, it was much quieter. The early hour kept the usual crowd away, leaving the entrance relatively calm. He walked in without hesitation. This time, he didn't stop at the reception. Using his Hunter ID, he headed straight for the elevator and selected the 3rd floor. The building had 12 floors in total, each assigned different functions, and access depended on a hunter's clearance. The 3rd floor, however, was open to all registered hunters. The elevator doors slid open, and Kale stepped out. The atmosphere was different here. Clean. Organized. It almost felt like stepping into a bank, which made sense. This floor handled exchanges, where tower coins could be converted into real-world currency. Exactly why he was here. Kale walked toward an empty counter. A staff member sat behind it, and as he approached, she greeted him with a bright, practiced smile. Good morning. Welcome to the exchange center. How can I assist you today? I'd like to exchange tower coins, Kale replied. The process was smooth. He presented his ID, confirmed the amount, and within minutes, the transaction was complete. The exchange rate stood at 1 tower coin to 10 credits. 800 coins turned into 8,000 credits. By the time Kale stepped out of the building, he was officially richer. And yet, his expression didn't quite match. He let out a small breath, glancing at his account balance. Won't last long. Now that the tutorial was over, things were different. This was where real climbing began, and that meant preparation. There were too many things he needed, and not nearly enough money. A weapon was one of them, but he pushed that thought aside. The tower provided basic weapons on each floor. They weren't anything special, but for the lower levels they were more than enough. For now, something else mattered more. Potions. One of the most important resources for any hunter. Without them, survival became much harder. He could have bought them at the association, but prices there were always higher. From his memory, there was a smaller private shop nearby that sold them cheaper. So he walked. It didn't take long. The store was modest, attached to an old apartment building. Nothing flashy, but it had what he needed. Kale stepped inside, his eyes scanning the shelves lined with small vials filled with different colored liquids. Every vial carried a clear label, showing exactly what it was meant for. He walked up to the counter and started picking what he needed. 3 health potions. 5 mana potions. The total came out to 3,500 credits. Kale couldn't help but sigh under his breath as he calculated the price in his mind. Expensive but necessary. He didn't stop there either, picking up a few other useful items he could afford. By the time he was done, his balance had dropped to just over 1,000 credits. He stepped out of the store, shaking his head slightly. At this rate, forget 3 billion. I might not even save anything. Still, there was no regret in his eyes. Every bit of it was necessary. You couldn't make money if you were dead. He booked a transit back home. By now, the streets had fully come alive. People moved about, shops opened, and the quiet morning had turned into a steady buzz of activity. The vehicle soon pulled up in front of his apartment building. Kale got off and made his way upstairs. When he reached the door, he noticed it was locked. Lyra had already left. He unlocked it and stepped inside. The air carried the faint smell of freshly cooked food, warm and familiar. It seems like it hadn't been long since she left. On the table sat a covered bowl. Beside it, a small note. Eat well and stay safe. Kale stared at it for a second, then smiled faintly. He sat down and uncovered the bowl. The food was still warm, and he ate quietly, finishing every last bite. After washing the dishes, he returned to his room. For a while, he just sat at the edge of his bed. No movement, no distractions, just silence. He adjusted his breathing, letting his thoughts settle. He was about to enter the tower again, and this time it wasn't a tutorial. This was the real thing. Minutes passed. Then Kale stood up. His eyes were steady now. Ready. He equipped his gear, making sure everything sat properly. The potions he had bought rested safely in his inventory space. Everything was in place. All that remained was to begin. Kale reached inward, focusing on the connection he had gained after awakening. Every hunter who cleared the tutorial formed a link with the tower. There was no need to physically visit a rift anymore. Once per day they could enter from anywhere. The moment he willed it, a screen appeared before him. Tower access available. Do you wish to enter tower? Yes/no. He didn't hesitate. Yes. The world shifted instantly. When his senses returned, Kale found himself standing in a small, enclosed space. Stone walls surrounded him on all sides, with a matching floor and ceiling. The room was plain and empty. A start room. A safe point between floors. Every challenger entered the tower through a place like this, and after completing a floor, they would return here before exiting. Kale took a slow look around. Then he noticed it. A small, glowing figure floated not far from him, barely the size of his fist. It shimmered faintly with a soft blue light. He narrowed his eyes, taking a step closer. Tiny humanoid features. Delicate wings fluttering rapidly behind it. A fairy? Before he could process it further, the creature spoke. Greetings, challenger. Welcome to your start room. I am Aona, your personal tower guide. Kale blinked. The voice was clear and surprisingly loud for something so small. Tower guide, he repeated. His mind moved quickly, searching through both his memories, but nothing came up. He had never heard of something like this before. Aona seemed to notice his confusion. The tower exists to test challengers and measure their worth, she said calmly. Exceptional performance yields corresponding rewards. Your tutorial assessment exceeded standard parameters. Guide assignment is one of the resulting adjustments. Kale went quiet. So that was it. An assessment beyond the normal scale. SSS rank. From what he knew, S rank was already considered the peak among humans. No one had ever gone beyond that, which meant no one had ever gotten something like this before, which explained why it felt so unfamiliar to him. But instead of pride, a different thought settled in. Something about it didn't sit right. The assessment itself wasn't entirely his doing. There had been an unknown interference. Something that had affected the result. And if something could interfere with the tower, Kale's eyes darkened slightly. That wasn't normal. The tower was something humanity still didn't fully understand. For something to influence it meant one thing. It was dangerous. Was it targeting him? Or was it just coincidence? Neither answer felt comforting. He let out a slow breath and pushed the thought aside. Not now. That was something to think about later. Right now, something else mattered. Kale looked back at the small floating figure. So, Aona, he said, his voice steady. What exactly can you do? Without hesitation, Aona began her explanation. I can answer questions within my authority level, she said calmly. I can also provide hints for upcoming floor challenges, as long as they fall within that same limit. In addition, I manage your start room and related functions. Kale frowned slightly. Manage the start room? What exactly is there to manage? Aona floated a little closer, her wings fluttering softly. Unlike most start rooms, yours exists in a stable space. This allows you to store items here or modify the environment to your preference. I oversee those functions, so you may inform me if you require any adjustments. Kale's brows drew together. A stable start room? From what he knew, start rooms weren't reliable. Many hunters had tried storing items in them, only to return later and find everything gone. It led to the common belief that start rooms weren't truly fixed spaces, but something closer to temporary constructs. And yet, his was different. A faint sense of satisfaction settled in his chest. This alone solved a major problem. Inventory space was limited, and hunters constantly struggled with storage. Having a place that was secure and accessible, even if only once a day, was a huge advantage. He looked back at Aona. You said you can answer questions and give hints, but you keep mentioning authority. What exactly does that mean? Aona nodded slightly. Tower guides are entities created by the Tower Master to assist exceptional challengers. Kale immediately cut in. Tower Master? You're saying someone created the tower? Insufficient authority, Aona replied without pause. I cannot answer that. Kale let out a quiet breath, rubbing his temple. Then what can you answer? My current authority level is limited, she said, her tone lowering slightly. I can only provide basic information. I'm sorry if I'm not very useful right now. I must seem useless right now. Kale blinked, caught off guard. When did I call you useless? He shook his head lightly, dismissing it. Forget that. How does your authority level increase? As a guide, I am bound to the challenger I serve, Aona replied. Your performance within the tower directly affects my authority. As you grow stronger and achieve higher results, my capabilities will also expand. Kale nodded slowly. That made sense. Aona paused briefly, then added, Speaking of results, you have an unclaimed reward from your tutorial. She raised her small hand, and a faint glow gathered in the air before condensing into a small box that floated toward Kale. He stared at it, surprised. Unclaimed reward? I already got tower coins from the tutorial. That was the standard reward, Aona explained. Exceptional performance yields additional compensation. This is separate. Kale looked at the box for a moment, then reached out. The moment his fingers touched it, a screen appeared before him. Do you want to claim the reward? Yes/no. He selected yes without hesitation. Another notification appeared immediately. Reward claimed. Plus 200 tower coins. Plus 50 EXP. Infinite reward multiplier. Activated. Multiplier. X5. Reward adjusted. Plus 1000 tower coins. Plus 250 EXP. A small smile formed on Kale's lips. Not bad. The screen flickered again. You've level up X2. A subtle surge of strength flowed through his body. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was clear. His body felt lighter, stronger, more responsive. Without wasting time, Kale pulled up his status. Name? Kale Voss. Title? Dash. Class? Void Sovereign. Class perks? Void Absorption, Null Field, Sovereign Claim, Echo Strike. Level? 3. 16%. Health? 556. Mana? 360. Stats. Strength. 17. Agility. 14. Endurance. 17. Intelligence. 24. Vitality. 18. Constitution. 19. Stat points. 6. TC balance. 1000. Talent. Infinite Reward Multiplier. Kale stared at the screen for a moment, then let out a quiet breath, a grin forming despite himself. This is more like it. He dismissed the screen. It was time. Kale focused, willing the next step, and a new interface appeared before him. Please select your trial difficulty. Normal/nightmare/hell. He stared at it. Difficulty determined everything. The challenge, the risk, the reward. Most hunters chose normal. It was safe, predictable. A smaller group chose nightmare. Higher risk but better rewards. Those who survived it often rose far above the rest. But hell? No one chose hell. Kale's eyes lingered on it. A cautious part of him leaned toward nightmare. It was the logical choice. Balanced risk and reward. But another part of him pushed back. With his stats, his class, and most importantly, his talent, his growth rate was already abnormal. If rewards scaled with difficulty, then choosing the highest level would accelerate everything. Faster growth, faster power, faster money. 3 months was far too short to earn 3 billion credits, even on nightmare difficulty, unless luck was on his side and he got a high multiplier. That thought alone tipped the scale. Kale let out a slow breath, then shook his head slightly. No risk, no reward. He selected hell. Difficulty set. Hell. Adjusting floor parameters. Proceeding to floor 1. The world shifted instantly. When his vision cleared, Kale realized something was very wrong. He wasn't standing. His fingers were dug into rough stone, gripping tightly as his boots pressed against a narrow ledge. His body was angled against a steep cliffside, the rock cold and uneven beneath his hands. Below him, nothing. A deep gorge stretched endlessly downward, swallowed by thick fog. He couldn't even see the bottom. Kale's grip tightened instinctively, his heart skipping. One slip, and that was it. A chill ran down his spine as he forced himself to stay still. Then the notification came. Floor 1. Hell difficulty. Mission. Survival. Objective. Reach the cliff's summit. Warning. You have disturbed the Iron Leg Queen's territory. Her brood is aware of your presence. They are coming. Kale froze. They are coming? The words barely left his mouth before a faint sound reached him. Scraping. From below. Slowly he turned his head. His breath caught. Dozens of creatures were climbing toward him. Their bodies were massive, each one the size of a large dog. Their limbs, no, their legs looked like sharpened metal spikes, digging into the rock with ease as they moved. Fast. Too fast. You've got to be kidding. Fear hit him instantly, sharp and cold. For a split second, regret flashed through his mind. Hell difficulty. This was what it meant. But there was no time to dwell on it. The choice was made. There was no going back. Survive. That was all that mattered. Kale forced his gaze upward. The summit was far above, easily 200 meters or more. His jaw tightened. He had never done any climbing in like this before. The closest thing he had to experience was watching clips on TikTok. But that didn't matter now. He had to do it to survive. No matter what. If ordinary people climbed mountains, then he could also do it. Now that he was awakened, he was stronger than them, had far greater stamina. Even without experience, raw strength could carry him a certain distance. His eyes hardened with resolve, his grip tightening against the rock. A sharp scraping sound snapped him out of his thoughts. The creatures were closer now. Kale didn't hesitate. He reached upward, fingers locking onto a jagged edge, and pulled himself higher. He had to survive this. He couldn't afford to fall here, not with a sister depending on him, and a mother he still had to save. Kale threw everything he had into the climb. At first, he relied on raw strength, forcing his body upward with sheer will. But it didn't take long before reality caught up with him. He had been wrong. Strength alone wasn't enough. The cliff face was uneven and unpredictable. Some parts were solid and easy to grip, while others crumbled the moment he put weight on them. There were sections that looked sturdy but turned out to be slick, offering no real hold. Every movement had to be tested, adjusted, corrected. It slowed him down. and behind him the scraping sounds grew louder. The iron leg spiders were closing in on him. Damn it! Kale clenched his teeth. This wasn't a fair fight. He was struggling to climb while those things moved like they were born for it. Their spike-like legs pierced straight into the rock, anchoring them with ease. This was their territory, not his. Just then a vibration ran through the rock beneath his foot. Kale glanced down, and chill ran down his spine. One of the iron leg spiders had already caught up with him. Its body tensed, all 8 legs drawing in as if coiling for something. Then it leapt. Are you serious? Kale reacted on instinct. He released his right hand and let his body swing sideways, hanging off the cliff by 3 points of contact. A split second later, the spider slammed into the spot he had just left. The impact rang out like metal striking stone, shaking the cliff. A chunk of rock broke loose and fell into the fog below. Kale didn't waste the opening. While the creature was still recovering, he twisted his body, secured a new grip, and drove his leg forward with everything he had. His kick connected. The spider lost its hold instantly and dropped, its body disappearing into the fog without a sound. Kale didn't look down. A notification flashed briefly in his vision, confirming the kill, but he ignored it and kept climbing. There was no time. Another spider closed in. This one didn't leap. Instead, it lashed out, one of its sharp legs thrusting toward him like a spear. Kale jerked his body to the side. He avoided a direct hit, but not completely. The tip grazed his leg. A sharp pain flared as blood spilled. He gritted his teeth but didn't slow down. The spider pressed forward, relentless. Kale shifted his grip, hanging with one hand as he reached out with the other. His fingers locked onto a loose piece of rock. With a hard pull, he ripped it free and slammed it downward. The rock struck the spider's head. It didn't do much damage, but it didn't need to. It was just a distraction. In the same motion, Kale reached into his inventory and pulled out a vial. He didn't hesitate. He threw it. The vial shattered on impact, spilling a thick green liquid across the spider's body. A sharp sizzling sound followed almost instantly as the substance began to eat into its shell. The creature screeched. Moments later, it lost its grip and fell. Kale kept moving. Behind him, more screeches echoed, followed by multiple notifications. Some of the others had been caught in the splash. He exhaled sharply. That works. But he didn't relax. He only had 2 vials left. He couldn't afford to waste them. Time passed, though it felt stretched thin under pressure. Kale climbed, fought, and endured. He lost count of how many spiders he had killed. His body didn't come out untouched. His gear was torn in several places. His skin was scraped, bruised, and cut. Blood stained his clothes, and his hands were starting to go numb from the constant strain. The spiders, on the other hand, showed no sign of slowing down. They just don't stop. If this kept up, he wouldn't last. Then, suddenly, something clicked in his mind. Why hadn't he thought of it earlier? He was surrounded by enemies perfectly adapted to this environment. If Sovereign's claim worked the way he thought, then, Kale didn't hesitate. He activated it. A screen appeared before him. Sovereign's claim activated. Selecting random target within range. His eyes stayed fixed on it. Then, target selected. Target. Solid rock. Trait extracted. Endurance +1. You've got to be kidding me. Kale nearly cursed it out loud. All these spiders around him and it chose a rock? He felt a slight boost in stamina, but it was nowhere near enough to change the situation. Then suddenly, a surge of strength rushed through his body. Another notification flashed. Monster Essence Integrated X17. Strength +8. Endurance +5. Agility +10. Kale's eyes widened. This was clearly void absorption at work, and the sheer effect of it caught him off guard. He already knew it was overpowered, but this, gaining stats just by killing monsters? If other hunters ever found out, they'd probably try to kill him out of pure jealousy. He didn't dwell on it. He was still in danger after all. With renewed strength, Kale pushed forward, climbing faster, striking harder, moving with more confidence. The The spiders still attacked, still relentless, but now he could keep up. The distance to the top began to shrink. Slowly, painfully, but surely, his body took more damage along the way. His muscles burned, his grip weakened, and every movement hurt. Still, he didn't stop. He couldn't. Finally, after what felt like forever, the edge came into reach. Kale forced his arm up, fingers locking onto the top. With the last of his strength, he pulled. His body rolled over the edge, and he collapsed onto solid ground. He lay there, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling as exhaustion consumed him. Every part of his body ached. He didn't even have the strength to move. Then a screen appeared. Floor 1 complete. Hell difficulty. Rating A. Enemies defeated 23. EXP gained 840. Tower coins gained 600. Infinite reward multiplier activated. Multiplier X5. Reward adjusted. EXP gained 4,200. Tower coins gained 3,000. You've leveled up X5. Name Kale Voss. Title Dash. Class Void Sovereign. Class perks Void Absorption, Null Field, Sovereign Claim, Echo Strike. Level 8, 27%. Health 938. Mana 660. Stats Strength 35. Agility 34. Endurance 37. Intelligence 44. Vitality 33. Constitution 29. Stat points 21. TC balance 3,000. Talent Infinite reward multiplier. Kale let the status screen linger before him for a moment before closing it, the faint glow fading from his eyes as his expression settled into something neutral. For most hunters, this would have been more than enough. 1 tower run, 5 levels gained, and a noticeable rise in strength. Something worth feeling proud of. But Kale didn't feel much. Not disappointment, not satisfaction. Just a quiet acknowledgement that it wasn't enough. Not for what he had set his sights on, at least. Before he could dwell on it any longer, the space around him began to twist. The remains of the trial blurred and peeled away, like a scene being erased, until the familiar stone walls of his start room took their place. The transition came without warning, yet carried a strange smoothness to it, leaving him on the cold floor in the same position he had been in before the shift. He stayed there for a second, breathing slowly, then pushed himself up with a slight grimace as his body protested. A flicker of movement caught his attention. Aona had been floating quietly in the corner, but the moment she noticed him, she moved toward him at once. Kale glanced at her, his brows drawing together slightly. Had she been here the entire time he was in the trial? The thought crossed his mind. And if that was the case, did it mean that even when he wasn't in the tower, she would just remain here, spending all her time in this empty space? His gaze moved across the space. Bare stone walls stretched in every direction, dull and lifeless. He remembered she had mentioned he could design the room however he wanted, but at the time he hadn't cared, deciding to treat it as nothing more than a place to store things. Now, the thought felt different. Aona didn't feel like some lifeless tower guide. From the little he had seen, she reacted, spoke, even showed hints of emotion. Leaving something like that in a place this empty felt off. He exhaled quietly, pushing the thought aside for later. It wasn't urgent, but he'd deal with it eventually. For now, he focused on her. Aona stopped in front of him, her expression bright with excitement. Congratulations, Challenger. You've completed your first tower trial and performed exceptionally. Kale frowned slightly at that. Exceptional. That didn't sound right. He remembered his result clearly. An A rating. Good, yes, but not something he would call exceptional. Aona tilted her head slightly, as if sensing his doubt. The Hell difficulty trial is different from the lower tiers, she explained. As you may have noticed, it does not follow the standard format. Because of that, the threshold for an exceptional performance is adjusted. An A rating qualifies. Kale paused, then nodded slowly. That made sense. Thinking back, the difference had been obvious. From what he knew, normal and nightmare difficulty trials followed similar structures: survival, combat, straightforward objectives, just with increasing difficulty. Hell difficulty was nothing like that. Clinging to a cliff while being hunted wasn't exactly standard. He let out a quiet breath, a hint of self-awareness creeping in. The name alone should have been enough of a warning. Hell was never used to describe anything mild. It always meant suffering, something brutal and unforgiving. Choosing it without thinking it through properly. That was on him. Aona, unaware of his thoughts, raised her hand slightly. You have also received an additional reward for your performance. Would you like to claim it now? A soft shimmer formed in the air, and a small gift box appeared before him. Kale looked at it for a moment, curiosity flickering, but it faded just as quickly. Later, he said, shaking his head. Right now, his body felt like it was barely holding together. Leveling up had kept him going through the trial, but it didn't erase the exhaustion underneath. What he needed wasn't rewards. It was rest. With a simple motion, he sent the gift box into his inventory. Aona gave a small nod, and Kale didn't linger any longer. He waved briefly before stepping away. The stone walls dissolved again. A moment later, he was back in his room. Warm sunlight poured in through the window, filling the space with a soft glow, but he barely noticed it. Without hesitation, he stripped off his gear, letting it fall where he beneath him until only his underwear remained. Reaching into his inventory, he pulled out 2 vials, a health potion and a stamina potion, and drank them both without pause, not even registering the taste. A faint warmth spread through his body. That was enough. He dropped onto the bed, and the moment his head touched the pillow, sleep took him. When Kale opened his eyes again, the light in the room had shifted. The sun sat lower now, shadows stretching longer across the floor. A few hours had passed at least, and even without checking, he could tell from how his body felt. The exhaustion was mostly gone. The pain hasn't though. He slowly pushed himself up, wincing as a dull ache ran through his entire body. Faint bruises marked his skin, dull purple patches left behind by injuries that still hadn't fully healed. Without hesitation, he reached into his inventory again, pulled out another potion, and drank it. Warmth spread through him again as he felt his injuries begin to heal at a faster pace. Not something visible at a glance, but still noticeable enough for now. Leaning back against the headboard, Kale let out a slow breath as his thoughts returned to the trial. An A rating. Objectively, it wasn't bad, especially considering how things had gone. But that didn't sit right with him. He remembered it clearly. The close calls, the moments where things could have easily gone wrong. He had cleared it, yes, but not cleanly. And that mattered. A victory decided by luck wasn't something he could rely on. It wasn't strength, it was a warning. A reminder that next time, things might not fall in his favor. His gaze hardened slightly. He needed to be better prepared. That much was obvious. The problem was figuring out what exactly to prepare for. The tower was already unpredictable, but the normal and nightmare difficulties at least followed patterns. Enough hunters had gone through them, shared their experiences, and built some level of understanding of what to expect at each stage. You could at least plan around that. Hell difficulty didn't offer that. No records, no guides, no certainty. Either no one had survived it, or those who did kept quiet. Kale let out a quiet sigh, running a hand through his hair. That made things difficult. With the resources he had, he couldn't prepare blindly for everything. He needed direction, something solid to work with. His gaze shifted slightly, and a small spark of interest returned. Right, the reward. He still had that. Let's see if I get lucky, he muttered under his breath. Kale took a slow breath and reached into his inventory. The gift box appeared in his hand for a brief moment before slipping free and floating in front of him, suspended as if held by an unseen force. He stared at it, then reached out and tapped it. A translucent screen blinked into existence. Do you want to claim the reward? Yes/no. He didn't hesitate. Yes. The moment he made his choice, the screen burst into a cascade of notifications. Reward claimed. Plus 3,500 tower coins. Plus 3x mithril or F-grade raw material. Infinite reward multiplier. Activated. Multiplier. X3. 700. Reward adjusted. Plus 12,950,000 tower coins. Plus 3x mithril or C+ grade raw material. Kale stared at the screen, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. For a long moment, he just stood there, eyes locked on the floating text, wide and unblinking. Felt fragile, like if he blinked too hard, it would all disappear. A glitch, a mistake, something too good to be real. Slowly, he blinked once, then again, rubbing his eyes before looking back. The numbers were still there. Over 12 million tower coins. His throat tightened. If converted, that was well over 100 million credits. His mind went blank for a second. Although he had aimed for 3 billion credits before the elixir auction in 3 months, but it had only ever been a dream. Something distant. Something he told himself just to keep going. Deep down, he had never truly believed it. He had never believed he would get a high multiplier. Not with the kind of luck he had. But this was real. And it wasn't just the coins. His gaze shifted to the second reward. Mithril. Even in its lowest form, it was rare. It didn't exist outside the tower or rifts, and that alone made it priceless. The best mana conductor, a material people fought over. And this wasn't low grade. C+. That alone could sell for tens of millions. Kale swallowed as the numbers added themselves up in his head. Over 200 million credits. The realization hit him all at once, and a sharp headache followed. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing a hand to his temple. For someone who had never held more than a few tens of thousands at once, this wasn't just a big number. It was overwhelming. Numbers like this belonged in calculations, not in his life. He exhaled slowly and dismissed the screen. Silence filled the room again as he sat down on the edge of his bed, letting his mind settle. A few minutes passed before he brought up his status once more. 12,953,000 TC. Still there. Real. A slow smile crept onto his face. At this rate, 3 billion credits didn't feel impossible anymore. If something like this happened a few more times, he shook his head. Calm down. The excitement was getting to him. He stood up, running a hand through his hair. I need a cold shower. He had barely taken a step when the door suddenly burst open. Kale flinched and turned sharply. A blonde girl stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes locking onto him instantly. Ezra? Then it hit him. He was still in nothing but his underwear. And not the loose kind. Heat rushed to his face as he quickly covered himself. Do you not know how to knock? He snapped. What are you even doing here? Lyra isn't here at the moment. He stopped. Suddenly hit him. She had to know Lyra wasn't here. She would have contacted her before coming. Which meant if she was standing in his room right now, then she came to see him. But why? Ezra was Lyra's only real friend. Back when things were still normal, the three of them used to spend time together. She was a year older, always a little sharper, a little more composed. But as his relationship with Lyra slowly fell apart, he had drifted away from her too. It had been a long time since they last spoke. Then a memory surfaced, and his expression tightened. After Lyra died, Ezra had blamed him. More than once. Still she stayed. Helped his mother. Helped him in her own way. Complicated didn't even begin to describe it. But right now, none of that mattered. Because she wasn't reacting the way she should. No embarrassment. No turning away. Instead, she stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and started walking toward him. Kale instinctively took a step back. What are you doing? She didn't stop. Don't come any closer. That made her pause, but the look she gave him wasn't normal. There was a hint of amusement in her eyes, like this was all just a casual game to her. What are you so scared of? She said lightly. It's not like I'm going to bite. Then why are you here? To help you. Help. She nodded, her tone casual. Lyra was worried. Said you'd challenge the tower and come back in bad shape. She asked me to check on you. Her gaze swept over him. And judging by the bruises, she was right. Kale blinked. That made sense. Ezra was a healer. Still, something about the way she said it didn't sit right. Before he could think further, she closed the distance. Too fast. One moment she was a step away. The next, she was right in front of him, her hand already pressing against his abdomen. Kale stiffened. What are you doing? Checking for injuries, she said simply. Her hand moved slowly, pressing along his muscles, feeling for something deeper. Kale grabbed her wrist, trying to push it away. There's no need. I'm fine. I insist. Her tone didn't change, but there was something firm beneath it. I promised Lyra I'd take proper care of you. I'm not missing something like internal damage. Kale opened his mouth to argue that he had already used a healing potion, that there was no way he had any internal injuries, but he stopped himself. Somehow he knew it wouldn't matter, so he let go and stood there, letting her do what she wanted. If he was being honest, this didn't feel like a proper examination. Felt wrong, like she was taking advantage of the situation. Time dragged on until Kale couldn't hold it in any longer. Ezra. Almost done, she said, her tone casual as ever. A moment later, she stepped back. No internal injuries, just surface bruising. Kale exhaled quietly, holding back a sarcastic remark. Ezra raised her hand again, placing it flat against his chest. This time, her expression shifted, more focused. A soft green light began to glow from her palm. Warmth spread instantly through his body. It flowed gently, like sinking into a hot bath after exhaustion. The tension in his muscles eased, the lingering pain fading piece by piece. The bruises disappeared before his eyes. Within seconds, everything was gone. Kale looked down at himself, flexing slightly. He exhaled. No wonder healers were valued this much. This felt far better than any potion. The light faded, and Ezra pulled her hand back. So, she asked, studying him closely, how do you feel now? Kale rolled his shoulders and stretched his arms, testing his body to see how it felt. It was better than he expected. The stiffness was gone. The dull ache that had clung to him before had completely disappeared. Even when he twisted his waist and flexed his fingers, there was no lingering pain or discomfort. He let out a quiet breath and glanced at Ezra. I feel great. Everything's gone. Not even a scar left. Ezra smiled at that, a small, satisfied curve of her lips. Her eyes drifted over him for a moment before she spoke. That's good to hear. Can't have this good physique of yours getting ruined, can we? Kale rolled his eyes, though there was no real annoyance behind it. So you're a healer, he said, shifting the conversation. I knew you awakened last year, but I didn't know it was the legendary healer class. He wasn't exaggerating. Healers were rare, the kind of rare that could completely change a team's value. Even a low-tier healer could match recovery potions in effectiveness, sometimes even surpass them since they could keep healing as long as they had mana. That alone made them worth more than most combat classes. And higher-level healers were on a completely different scale. There were stories about them restoring limbs in seconds. Kale didn't know how true those stories were, but after everything he had seen, he wasn't foolish enough to dismiss them outright. Ezra didn't answer immediately. Something in her expression shifted, subtle but noticeable. The ease she carried a moment ago faded, replaced by something tighter. She took a small step back as if creating distance. I'd rather not talk about it, she said quietly. Before Kale could respond, she turned toward the door. I'll get going. And just like that, she left. The door closed behind her, leaving the room strangely quiet. Kale stared at it for a moment, his brows slowly pulling together. Was she just shy? He shook his head almost immediately. That didn't make sense. The same girl who had been openly staring at and casually touching his bare chest earlier suddenly acting shy? No way. Still, that last look on her face. It really did look like she had been shy. He exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. A sudden shift like that wasn't normal. The only explanation that came to mind sounded ridiculous, but it lingered anyway. Split personality? He muttered under his breath. He clicked his tongue and dismissed the thought. It didn't feel worth digging into right now. He turned and made his way to the mirror across the room. It had been covered by his setup before, but now it was out in the open. There was some dust particles clinging to the surface, dulling it a bit, but it didn't matter, it still reflected well enough. Kale stopped in front of it and flexed slightly, watching how his muscles moved. A grin spread across his face before he could stop it. Damn, I'm almost perfect. He turned slightly, checking himself from another angle. His build wasn't bulky, just lean and refined, with solid muscle and barely any body fat. Days of intense training, along with the stat boosts from leveling up, had sharpened his physique until it looked almost sculpted. He ran a hand through his rough brown hair, pushing it back as he studied his reflection. All I need now is a proper haircut. As long as it's not one of those mid-chapters Man YMC haircuts, I'm good. His gaze then drifted downward for a second, and his grin widened without restraint. Yeah. Definitely well endowed too. He stood there a bit longer than necessary, clearly enjoying the moment, before another thought slipped in. The recent rewards, the money, the steady progress he had been making, it all added up in his head in a way that only made his smile grow. Good looks, good build, and getting rich, he murmured. I'm basically the prize. It was no wonder Ezra had been staring earlier. The moment that thought settled, his expression stiffened. A faint flush crept up his neck as he looked away from the mirror. All right, that's too far, he muttered. She's your sister's friend. He shook his head and stepped back, about to move away when the door suddenly slammed open. Kale reacted on instinct, grabbing the nearest cloth and covering himself as he turned sharply. For God's sake, do you not know how to knock? Ezra stood at the doorway, her face noticeably red, her gaze lowered. Sorry, she said quickly. I just came to tell you, you should go check the hospital. I think something's wrong. Kale blinked. What do you? But she was already turning away. The door shut again, and her footsteps faded almost immediately. Kale remained where he was, staring at the closed door before letting out a slow breath. Yeah. She definitely has some kind of split personality. There was no better explanation, at least not one he could come up with right now. His expression gradually turned serious as her words settled in. Something wrong at the hospital. His first thought was money. It had always been tight, and Lyra had been carrying most of the burden alone. Hospital bills could easily become a problem. But that didn't quite add up. If it was just about finances, Ezra would have said so directly, which meant it had to be something else. Kale frowned slightly, trying to piece it together, but nothing came to mind. After a moment, he exhaled. Guess I'll find out when I get there. He took a quick shower, changed, and headed out not long after. The hospital was about 20 minutes east, a route he knew well enough that he didn't need to think about it. By the time the transit came to a stop, his attention had already shifted forward. The building stood out immediately, large and clean, almost too polished compared to everything around it. It dominated the district's skyline in a quiet way that made its importance obvious. It made sense. The place was funded by the Hunter Association. Kale stepped down and walked toward the entrance without hesitation. Inside, the lobby looked exactly as expected. Bright lights, clean floors, clear signs, and a steady flow of people moving through. Some sat near the reception area, waiting to be called, while others spoke quietly among themselves. He didn't stop. He already knew where he was going. The 5th floor, his mother's ward. He moved straight to the elevator and stepped in. As the doors closed and the lift began to rise, his thoughts drifted, pulled toward something he hadn't really allowed himself to think about properly. His mother. Their relationship had never been distant. If anything, it had always been close. Their father had been gone before either of them could remember, so it had always just been the three of them growing up. Which was why the question felt uncomfortable. Why hadn't he reacted the way he should have? Why hadn't he been there more? The answer came easily, and that only made it worse. Lyra. She had been there the whole time, taking on everything without complaint, without even making it obvious. She had carried the weight so quietly that he hadn't felt it himself. It was like being shielded from something you should have faced. Kale's jaw tightened slightly. If Lyra had been the one holding everything together, then who had been there for her? The thought pressed down on him, and his chest tightened. He had been a terrible son and an even worse brother. But before he could dwell on it any further, the elevator came to a stop with a soft chime. The doors opened. Kale stepped out into the quiet hallway, his focus returning as he moved forward. His mother's ward was just around the left turn of the L-shaped corridor. He walked toward it, steady and purposeful. But just as he was about to turn, a familiar voice reached him from down the hall. It was Lyra. A fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, filling the quiet hospital hallway with a cold, sterile glow. In front of one of the private wards stood a young girl with soft brown hair resting over her shoulders. Her delicate face would normally make people think of warmth and gentleness, but right now anxiety clouded her features while anger simmered quietly beneath her eyes. Lyra clenched the hem of her sleeve tightly as she stared at the man standing before her. The hospital director wore an expensive white suit that probably cost more than most people's yearly salary. But the elegance of it was completely ruined by his bloated figure. His stomach pushed so hard against the buttons that it looked as though they might burst apart at any moment. His face was even worse. The kind of face that makes people want to wash their eyes with holy water after seeing it. "I already told you, Director," Lyra said firmly, trying to suppress the disgust in her voice. "I'm not interested in your offer." The director sighed as though she was the one being unreasonable. "Why are you making this difficult for yourself?" he asked with a smile that made her skin crawl. "I've seen plenty of girls like you before. At first they all resist and pretend they have dignity, but eventually they come crawling back." His eyes slowly wandered across her body without any attempt to hide his intentions. "You won't be any different." Lyra's expression stiffened. "I'm still not interested," she repeated. "I only came here to take care of my mother." The smile on the director's face widened. "And that," he said softly, "is exactly why you should accept my offer." His tongue slid across his lips in a revolting manner as his gaze moved over her once more like a predator examining prey. "You see, I control this hospital. I decide who gets proper treatment. I decide whose bills become cheaper. I decide which patients are prioritized." He leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. "If you make me happy, I'll personally make sure your mother receives the best care possible. But if you refuse..." He left the rest unsaid. Lyra's face paled instantly. "You wouldn't dare," she snapped. "I can report you." Before she could finish, the director burst into a loud, mocking laughter that echoed through the empty hallway as he looked at her like a child who knew nothing about the world. "Young lady, you really are naive," he said while shaking his head. "What do you think runs society? Compassion? Justice?" He laughed again before his expression slowly turned colder. "This world belongs to people with power." His gaze sharpened slightly as he pointed toward the hospital room behind her. "And what exactly do you think someone like you can do against me? You'll only make things harder for yourself and for your mother." The words struck Lyra like cold water. Her lips trembled faintly before she lowered her head because deep down, she knew he was right. People like him always won. The director noticed the change in her expression and immediately softened his tone, pretending to sound gentle. "See? Isn't this better? I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. People who cooperate with me tend to live much easier lives." That disgusting smile returned to his face. "You're beautiful, Lyra. Satisfy me and I'll make sure both you and your mother live comfortably for the rest of your lives. You'll have money, luxury, security. Everything." He slowly stepped toward her. "You just need to make me happy." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The cold voice shattered the atmosphere instantly. Both of them froze before turning toward the source of the voice at the end of the hallway. A young man was walking toward them with calm steps. Kale. His face looked expressionless, yet his eyes carried a terrifying coldness that made the director's heart skip violently. It was killing intent. pure and undisguised. The director frowned in confusion at first, but a chill quickly crawled up his spine. For some reason, the young man walking toward him felt less like a person and more like a blade slowly being drawn from its sheath. Meanwhile, Lyra's eyes widened in shock. Kale? Why was he here? Kale ignored her completely. His gaze remained locked onto the director as he continued walking forward one slow step after another. I asked you, he said again, his voice colder this time. What the hell do you think you're doing? The director unconsciously took half a step backward. He himself was an awakened with a combat-oriented class, but unlike actual hunters, he had never risked his life fighting monsters. With his family's wealth and influence behind him, he had chosen comfort instead. Power, money, luxury. Using his connections, he secured the position of hospital director despite lacking the qualifications for it. His life had always gone smoothly, but right now none of that mattered because for the first time in years, he genuinely felt afraid. The young man standing before him looked like someone who could actually kill him. Not threaten him. Not bluff. Kill him. And the most terrifying part was the fact that he didn't seem to care about the consequences. Kale, stop. Lyra hurriedly grabbed his arm. The moment her fingers touched him, she could feel how tense his body was. His killing intent was so intense it made her chest tighten. A complicated emotion rose within her heart. Part of her wanted him to beat the disgusting man in front of them until he could no longer stand, but another part of her new reality wasn't that simple. The director came from a powerful family. If things escalated here, Kale would suffer the consequences. Kale slowly exhaled. The rage in his eyes dimmed slightly, though the coldness remained. I recorded everything, he said while staring directly at the director. Every single word. The director's expression changed instantly. Kale took another step forward. If you ever bother my sister again, I'll make you regret it. His voice became frighteningly quiet. Now get out of my sight before I stop controlling myself. The director's face twitched. For a brief moment humiliation flashed across his eyes before fear quickly suppressed it. You! He gritted out. This won't end here. Despite the threat, he was already retreating. His round body hurried awkwardly down the hallway as fast as his legs could carry him. At that moment, pride meant nothing to him. He had spent years carefully choosing targets who lacked protection. The nurse had assured him Lyra had no one to rely on. Who would have thought this monster would suddenly appear? His family might avenge him if he died, but that wouldn't bring him back to life, and he had no intention of dying today. Not when there was still so much pleasure left for him to enjoy. So he fled, as quickly as possible. Kale and Lyra silently watched his figure disappear around the corner. Under normal circumstances, the sight of his fat body wobbling while running might have looked ridiculous enough to make them laugh. But neither of them found it funny. After several seconds of silence, they finally turned toward each other. Lyra opened her mouth first, but Kale spoke before she could. How long? His voice was low and restrained, but the anger inside it was impossible to miss. How long has that bastard been bothering you? Lyra lowered her head quietly. She said nothing, but her silence already gave him the answer. Kale clenched his fists tightly. For a moment, he genuinely regretted not crippling the director right there. Eventually, however, he forced himself to calm down before stepping forward and pulling Lyra into his arms. I'm sorry, he whispered. I've been a terrible brother. Lyra froze slightly at first, but Kale tightened the embrace. But I promise, I'll fix things from now on. For several seconds she didn't respond. Then he heard it. A soft sniffle against his chest. Her shoulders trembled faintly as quiet sobs escaped her lips while the hallway fell silent around them. The two siblings simply remained there holding onto each other as though trying to make up for years of distance. Eventually, Lyra slowly pulled away. Her eyes were slightly red, but the concern inside them remained clear. You shouldn't involve yourself in this, she said softly. You should let me handle this. Don't say that, Kale replied immediately, his voice firm. I want to get involved. I want to share the burden. I want to be there for you and for Mom. His expression softened slightly. I know I've been selfish these past few years. I know I acted like none of this mattered to me, but she's my mother too. And you're my sister. He looked directly into her eyes. So stop carrying everything alone. Lyra bit her lip lightly. But nothing, Kale interrupted firmly. Don't hide something like this from me again. She wanted to argue. He could see it on her face, but after staring at him quietly for a few moments, she eventually gave a small nod. I need to go back inside, she murmured. Do you want to come with me? Kale glanced toward the hospital room door. For a brief moment guilt flashed across his face before he slowly shook his head. Not yet, he said quietly. I can't face her like this after disappearing for so long. He forced out a faint smile. You go take care of her. Leave the rest to me. Lyra stared at him silently for a few seconds before finally nodding again. Without another word, she turned and walked back into the hospital room. Kale remained standing there quietly, watching the door close behind her. After a long moment, he let out a tired sigh before turning around and slowly walking away down the empty hallway. Kale walked down the hospital hallway with slow steps, but beneath that calm exterior his emotions were anything but stable. His blood was boiling. Every time he remembered the way that disgusting director looked at Lyra, the rage inside him surged violently once again. A part of him wanted nothing more than to turn around, drag that bastard out of whatever corner he was hiding in, and beat him until every bone in his body shattered. But Kale restrained himself. Violence would feel satisfying in the moment, but it would only create bigger problems afterward. So instead, he forced himself to think rationally. He had recorded everything, every threat, every disgusting word. Normally, with his identity as a registered hunter, he could submit the footage directly to the Hunters Association's disciplinary division and request an official investigation. Once they dug into the director's affairs, Kale was certain they would uncover more dirt buried beneath the surface. That man didn't look intelligent enough to clean his tracks properly. The problem was his backing. Kale had no idea who stood behind the director, and he wasn't naive enough to believe the world operated fairly. People with connections rarely suffered real consequences. At worst, the director might receive some temporary punishment before returning as though nothing had happened. If his supporters were powerful enough, the entire matter could even disappear completely. Still, that didn't mean Kale intended to stay passive. People like the director were the most dangerous type. Cowards intoxicated by power. They acted arrogant toward the weak because they believed nothing could touch them, and humiliation was something they could never tolerate. What happened today was a slap across the director's face. There was no way a man like that would simply let it go. Sooner or later, he would retaliate. Kale suddenly slowed his steps. A colder possibility crossed his mind, causing his expression to darken. He could protect himself. That much he was confident about. But what about Lyra? What about their mother lying unconscious inside that hospital room? Kale suddenly began questioning one of his earlier decisions. He had originally wanted to keep Lyra away from the dangerous world of hunters. He didn't want her risking her life fighting monsters and challenging deadly tower trials. But now he realized how foolish that thinking was. This world was no different from a jungle. The weak had no voice. The strong decided everything. Trying to intentionally suppress Lyra's growth out of fear for her safety would only make her even more vulnerable in the future. Kale exhaled slowly as a new plan formed inside his mind. If he couldn't guarantee she would never face danger, then he would make sure she became someone danger couldn't easily harm. An iron fortress. A tank nobody could break through. The victor wasn't always the person who dealt the most damage. Sometimes it was simply the one who could endure longer than everyone else. You couldn't defeat what you couldn't hurt. Immediately, Kale began reorganizing his plans for the future. He would gather defensive equipment for Lyra, the best armor, protective artifacts, skills, treasures, anything that increased survivability. Now that he had money, acquiring those things wasn't impossible anymore. And with his infinite reward multiplier talent combined with the tower's hell difficulty rewards, even Kale himself had no idea what kind of treasures he might obtain later. As long as he kept climbing, stronger rewards would continue appearing. While lost in thought, Kale unconsciously arrived in front of the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime. He stepped inside and began descending. A few moments later, another ding echoed softly as the elevator reached the lower floor. Kale stepped out while still organizing plans in his head, only to nearly bump into someone coming from the opposite direction. He reacted quickly and stopped himself at the last second. The other person wasn't as fast. Bang! The collision sent several books and scattered papers flying across the floor. "Ah, sorry," Kale said immediately as he crouched down to help gather the mess. "I was distracted." "It's fine," the man replied while hurriedly picking up the fallen papers himself. "I wasn't paying attention either." The two silently gathered the scattered documents together. Once everything was picked up, Kale finally got a proper look at the man standing before him. He looked to be somewhere in his early 40s. Maybe younger. It was difficult to tell. His appearance was rough and exhausted. Long dark hair hung messily around his shoulders, dull and unkempt as though he hadn't cared for it in weeks. A layer of beard stubble covered his jaw while dark circles rested heavily beneath his eyes. Yet even beneath that haggard appearance, Kale could still tell this man originally possessed fairly decent features. But that wasn't what caught his attention. It was the strange feeling of familiarity. Not the kind shared between relatives. More like the feeling of seeing someone you vaguely recognized from somewhere important. Kale frowned slightly while staring at him. Meanwhile, the man awkwardly shifted under that gaze before clearing his throat lightly. Only then did Kale realize he had been staring for several seconds straight like a complete weirdo. "Sorry," Kale muttered while stepping aside. The man gave an awkward nod and began walking toward the elevator. But just before he entered, Kale's eyes suddenly landed on the name tag attached to his coat. Dun Duncan. Kale froze. His second memory stirred instantly. Dun Duncan, the legendary alchemist of the future. The man responsible for developing numerous high-grade potions and treatments that even Kale himself had once relied on. But why did he look like this? That thought flashed through Kale's mind briefly before another realization hit him. This was an opportunity. A huge one. Without hesitation, Kale suddenly rushed forward. The elevator doors were already closing, but he managed to slip inside just before they shut completely. Dunn immediately turned toward him with visible confusion. Meanwhile, Kale stared directly at him. "You're done, right?" he asked without wasting time. "I heard you're researching a cure for mana sickness." The moment those words left his mouth, Dunn's entire body stiffened. His eyes sharpened instantly. How does he know that? A storm of thoughts exploded inside his mind. He had kept that research hidden from almost everyone. Very few people even knew he was studying mana sickness at all. Had the hospital director discovered it somehow? Was this young man sent by him? Dunn forced himself to calm down despite the growing unease in his chest. There was still no certainty yet. "Who are you?" he asked carefully. "How do you know my name? And how do you know about my research?" His voice sounded calm on the surface, but Kale could still hear the faint tension leaking through. Only then did Kale finally realize something important. He may have been too reckless. To him, Dun Duncan was a famous figure from the future, someone whose achievements were known worldwide. But to present-day Dunn, this research was likely a tightly guarded secret. Kale suddenly imagined how he himself would react if a stranger casually approached him and started talking about his infinite reward multiplier talent. Yeah, he'd probably panic too, realizing that Kale inwardly cursed his own carelessness. Now he needed to fix this situation before the man in front of him completely misunderstood his intentions. Kale looked at Dunn's face and could clearly see the tension hidden beneath his calm expression. The man was trying his best not to panic, but his eyes had already betrayed him. Kale quickly realized he needed to smooth things over before the situation became even more awkward. "Sorry," he said with a small shake of his head. "That was rude of me. My name's Kale. My mother is admitted here, so I came to visit her." He paused briefly before continuing in a more casual tone. "As for how I know about your research, let's just say I heard some things here and there." Dunn stared at him silently. Heard some things my ass. Nobody knew about the research. He had kept everything hidden precisely because he knew what kind of people worked in this hospital. Immediately, suspicion rose inside him. Did the director send you? Dunn suddenly asked. The atmosphere inside the elevator instantly turned cold. Cale's eyes darkened sharply as rage surged across his face. Why the hell would I work for that bastard? Even Dunn was slightly startled by the reaction. He hated that corrupt, oversized pig himself, but something told him the young man in front of him hated the director even more than he did. Cale soon realized he had overreacted and exhaled lightly before calming himself down. Sorry, he muttered. Just had a bad run-in with that fat pig. Dunn blinked once before suddenly chuckling. Well, every run-in with that man is a bad one. Cale couldn't help but agree. Even though today was technically their first meeting, the director had already secured a permanent place on Cale's list of people he despised. Dunn's expression gradually became more serious again. Then what exactly do you want from me? He asked. If you're from the media looking for an interview or some miracle headline, then I'm afraid you came too late. His eyes dimmed slightly. The research already failed. There's nothing left to continue anymore. Cale frowned immediately. Failed? Why? Dunn leaned tiredly against the elevator wall before answering. Funding. A bitter smile appeared on his face. No money means no research. My relationship with the director has never been good, so he cut off my funding a long time ago. I've been using my personal savings to continue everything since then, but those already dried up. He let out a quiet sigh. So yeah, you could say the project is dead. Just then, the elevator came to a stop with a soft ding. The doors slowly slid open. Dunn stepped forward, but before leaving, he paused and turned back toward Cale. Sorry to disappoint you, kid, he said with a tired smile. But there's nothing left for this old man to offer. What if I provide the funding? Dunn froze mid-step. Slowly, he turned back around. What did you just say? Cale met his gaze calmly. I said I'm interested in funding the research. Dunn stared at him for several seconds in complete confusion. Why? Before Cale could answer, the elevator gave another warning sound reminding them both to either enter or leave. Dunn rubbed his forehead lightly before stepping out. Come with me, he said. Let's talk in my office. Cale followed behind him through a quieter hallway before eventually arriving at a small office tucked away near the back of the floor. The moment the door opened, Cale was greeted by pure chaos. Books were piled everywhere. Stacks of papers covered almost every visible surface while handwritten notes and research files were scattered across desks and shelves. It looked less like an office and more like the aftermath of a storm. Dunn scratched the back of his head awkwardly. I wasn't expecting visitors, so... It's a little messy. Cale shook his head. It's fine. Dunn gestured for him to sit before walking around the desk and dropping heavily into his chair. The relaxed expression from earlier disappeared as he looked directly at Cale. So, he began seriously. You said you want to fund the research. His brows furrowed slightly. But why? I already told you the project failed. Most people would be pulling their money away from something like this, not investing in it. Cale shrugged casually. Let's just say I have confidence in both the project and the person behind it. Dunn's eyes narrowed slightly. Clearly, he still wasn't fully convinced. Cale noticed the hesitation and quickly decided to lower the man's guard a little. My mother has late-stage mana sickness, he said quietly. So you can think of this as me investing in hope. His tone carried genuine sincerity. And technically, he wasn't lying. Although there was supposedly an elixir appearing in an auction 3 months from now that could cure almost anything, it was still nothing more than a rumor at the moment. There was no guarantee it would actually work. Even if he somehow managed to obtain it, there was still the possibility of failure. So supporting Dunn's research could also serve as a backup plan. Dunn's expression softened slightly after hearing that. I see. But after a few seconds, his face turned serious once more. I understand your situation, but research like this isn't cheap, he warned carefully. The amount needed isn't some small figure, so unless you truly understand what you're getting into. Suddenly, A transparent notification screen popped up in front of him. Dunn's eyes widened instantly. His unfinished words got stuck in his throat. This. He stared at the screen in disbelief. What is this? Kale leaned back calmly. I just transferred 100,000 tower coins to you, he said casually. That should be enough to keep the research running for now, right? Dunn completely froze. Enough? This was far beyond enough. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at the notification again, almost wondering if he was hallucinating. Meanwhile, Kale simply nodded. That's good then. He stood up from his seat. I still have some things to handle today, so let's exchange contact information first. We can discuss the cooperation details later. Dunn snapped out of his daze and immediately nodded. Why yeah, sure. The two quickly exchanged contact information. Even after Kale left the office, Dunn still remained seated there staring blankly at the transfer notification floating before him. Meanwhile, Kale returned to the elevator and headed back down toward the hospital lobby. Once he arrived outside, he didn't linger around for long. He immediately booked transit toward his next destination, the Hunters Association. The third floor of the Hunters Association building was bustling with activity by the time Kale arrived. The exchange center was filled with hunters moving in and out constantly. Some were discussing recent tower runs while others stood in line waiting to exchange tower coins for Earth credits. Kale calmly joined one of the shorter queues. A few minutes later, his turn arrived. The woman behind the counter looked to be somewhere in her mid-30s. She greeted him with a professional smile the moment he approached. Welcome to the exchange center. How may I help you today? I'd like to exchange some tower coins, Kale replied. Certainly. She reached beneath the counter and handed him a small silver device. Go ahead whenever you're ready. The device was specially designed to store and process tower coin transactions. While direct transfers between awakeners were possible, equipment like this was far safer and more efficient for large-scale exchanges handled by organizations like the Hunters Association. It also prevented fraud and theft during transactions. Kale placed his hand against the device before inputting an amount. 500,000 tower coins. The woman accepted the device and began processing the exchange. However, after pulling up Kale's hunter information, her expression subtly shifted. According to the records, he had only officially become a hunter 2 days ago, so how did someone like that possess this much wealth already? Was he some hidden young master from a powerful family? Still, she wisely chose not to ask questions. It wasn't her job to investigate where hunters got their money from. Kale naturally noticed the slight change in her expression and inwardly sighed. He had expected this reaction already. That was the problem with accumulating wealth too quickly before building enough influence to support it. People started asking questions. Luckily, he hadn't exchanged everything he possessed. Not even close. There was no way he would expose the full extent of his wealth this early. Publicly, the Hunters Association presented itself as humanity's righteous pillar against the monster threat. But Kale knew better than most that humans remained humans no matter what organization they belonged to. Greed existed everywhere. Corruption existed everywhere. And the Hunters Association was no exception. If news of his sudden wealth spread upward to certain people within the higher ranks, it wouldn't take long before attention started gathering around him. And attention was the last thing Kale wanted right now. Because once enough powerful people started investigating him, the possibility of his secret being exposed would increase dramatically. He didn't even want to imagine what would happen afterward. At best, he would lose his life. At worst, he'd become nothing more than a tool. A slave forced to endlessly enter the tower and generate wealth for others. The thought alone made his expression darken slightly. After completing the transaction, Kale quietly left the Hunters Association building. For the first time in his life, his bank account felt almost unrealistically heavy. 5 million credits. Now it was finally time to begin setting his plans into motion. Kale pulled out his phone and opened his banking app. The glow from the screen reflected faintly in his eyes as he entered the transfer amount without hesitation. 1 million credits. His finger tapped the confirmation button, and the transfer instantly went through. At first, he had considered going shopping for Lyra himself. buying proper equipment, protective gear, emergency supplies, maybe even a weapon or two for her upcoming tutorial. But after thinking about it carefully, he realized that was probably a terrible idea. Knowing himself, he would most likely end up buying the heaviest armor possible. Thick layers of reinforced metal, absurd defensive capability, enough weight to cripple mobility entirely. The kind of equipment meant to survive explosions rather than actual combat. He could already imagine it clearly in his head. The first edition of the Lyra Iron Bucket series version 1.0. Kale almost laughed at the thought. No, letting her choose according to her own fighting style was definitely the smarter option. That did not mean he had completely abandoned the idea though. Just as he was about to type a message to explain the sudden transfer, his phone immediately began vibrating in his hand. Lyra. The corners of Kale's eyes twitched slightly. Does she ever put her phone down? Still, he accepted the call. Thankfully, experience had taught him something important over the years. Whenever Lyra entered full panic mode, her voice could reach terrifying levels. So the moment he saw her calling after sending that amount of money, Kale already knew better than to place the phone directly against his ear. So instead, he wisely kept it a few centimeters away. The next moment, a sharp, panicked voice exploded from the speaker. What the hell, Kale? Even with the distance, he still winced slightly. Where did you get that much money from? Kale opened his mouth to answer, but Lyra did not give him the chance. What did you sell this time? She suddenly paused for a second as though realizing something. Wait, no, that doesn't make sense. Her voice became even more alarmed. You don't even own anything worth that much. A bad feeling immediately rose in Kale's chest. What did you do? She asked quickly. Don't tell me you did something illegal. Did you steal? Did you scam somebody? Did you? Okay, Lyra. Kale finally interrupted before her imagination got any worse. You're panicking right now. I'm not panicking. You sound very panicked. I am being reasonably concerned. Kale rubbed his forehead tiredly. Take a deep breath or something first. From the other end, he heard her inhale deeply. Then silence followed. Temporary silence, but silence nonetheless. Kale already knew calming her down halfway would not be enough. Lyra was smart. Too smart, honestly. There was no way she would easily accept a random million credit transfer without questioning it. I didn't do anything illegal, he said calmly. Or anything dangerous. Then where did the money come from? Kale paused briefly before answering. I got lucky during my first tower trial. The rewards were better than expected. The line instantly fell silent again. This time, the silence stretched much longer. Clearly, she did not buy it. Honestly, Kale did not blame her. Rewards worth 1,000,000 credits from the first floor sounded ridiculous. Most newcomers would celebrate getting rewards worth a few thousand credits. Tens of thousands was already considered extremely lucky. But 1,000,000? Nobody with common sense would believe that. Kale himself understood that much. Unfortunately, he had no better explanation. There was no way he could tell her about the strange entity that had interfered with his tutorial. Nor could he explain his reward multiplier talent. The entire situation was still filled with too many things even he himself did not fully understand yet. There was also the Tower Master to consider. A being capable of creating something as vast and mysterious as the tower was not someone Kale wanted to offend carelessly. If another existence had truly managed to interfere with his tutorial right under the Tower Master's nose, then who knew what kind of implications that carried? Too many variables existed. Too many unknowns. Until he figured things out properly, it was better to keep Lyra in the dark. The silence finally broke with a long sigh from the other side. Okay. Kale blinked slightly. If you say you didn't do anything illegal, then I'll believe you. Her voice softened afterward. You probably have your reasons for not telling me everything. A faint smile appeared on Kale's face. But please be careful, okay? She continued quietly. Don't do anything that'll hurt you. The concern in her voice was genuine enough that Kale could not help smiling a little more. No need to worry, he said lightly. I don't plan on dying anytime soon. A trace of amusement entered his tone. I still have a cute little sister to take care of. You. Lyra's voice immediately lost some of its seriousness, the earlier worry in her tone weakening almost instantly. Then, under her breath, she muttered something that sounded suspiciously close to doofus. Kale chuckled softly before shifting the conversation back. As for the money, use it properly. Buy equipment for your tutorial. Protective gear first, emergency supplies too. Don't try saving it for something else. He paused briefly before adding, I still have enough left over to last us for a while, so don't hold back when spending. There was another short silence before she finally answered. Okay. Good. Kale nodded slightly to himself. Oh, and one more thing. I'm planning to do another tower run tonight, so if I'm already asleep when you get home, don't wake me up for dinner. I need proper rest before midnight. The line became quiet again. It felt like Lyra wanted to say something more, but after a few seconds, all she said was, Stay safe. I will. The call ended shortly afterward. Kale slipped the phone back into his pocket before exhaling slowly. Now that he was done dealing with Lyra, it was time for the next order of business. Himself. The previous challenge had shown him just how useless his current leather gear truly was, though honestly, that was expected from equipment bought from some low-end second-hand dealer. Still, he decided to get some weapons first. Kale had already decided not to limit himself to a single type. Whether it was the current him or the future him, neither had ever been overly specialized. Their mentality was simple. Use whatever gets the job done. Sword, axe, spear, throwing weapons. Anything useful was acceptable. Maybe it made him a jack of all trades, but Kale never really cared about titles so long as the weapon killed efficiently. Once he started shopping, he showed absolutely no restraint. Combat swords, compact battle axes, long spears, even several throwable short spears. By the time he finished, nearly 500,000 credits had already disappeared from his account. Afterward came the essentials, potions and lots of other essential stuffs. He even bought reinforced climbing rope. Why? Because after the nonsense the tower forced him through during the previous trial, Kale no longer trusted it to behave rationally. For all he knew, the next challenge might require him to climb a cliff again while being chased by monsters. Better prepared than dead. Once the shopping was finished, only one thing remained. Armor. Kale already knew exactly what he wanted. After booking a transit ride, he began heading toward his destination. As the journey continued, the atmosphere around him gradually began changing. The buildings became cleaner and more organized while the streets themselves looked far more refined. Everything felt different. That was because they had already entered a second-tier district. Unlike the third district where they came from that was filled with unstable rifts and dense ambient mana pollution, the mana concentration here was much lower. Even the air felt fresher because of it. Eventually, the transit came to a stop before a massive building covered in sleek silver-black metal. A bright sign hung above the entrance. Spectre Guild. Hunters moved in and out of the building constantly, most dressed in expensive-looking combat gear. Some stood in groups discussing upcoming rift expeditions while others carried massive weapons across their backs with relaxed confidence. Kale ignored all of it. He was not here to sightsee. Stepping into the building, he headed directly toward the reception desk. The receptionist looked up as he approached, maintaining a professional smile. Hello. Welcome to the Spectre Guild. How may I help you today? Kale met her gaze calmly. I'm here for the Spectre X Nano Bracelet. The moment the receptionist heard what he came for, her expression immediately changed. Her eyes visibly brightened as she straightened slightly in her seat. Just a moment, sir, she said quickly while reaching for the communication device on her desk. Someone will be with you shortly. Kale simply nodded and waited. He did not have to wait long. Only a few moments later, the elevator doors at the far end of the hall slid open and a man dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit stepped out. His sharp gaze swept across the reception area before instantly locking onto Kale. And for a brief second, Kale could have sworn the man's eyes practically flashed with currency symbols. His brows furrowed faintly. He also did not miss the receptionist's earlier reaction either. The woman had looked like she had just discovered a goose capable of laying golden eggs. Kale was not stupid. It did not take him long to piece things together. So the sales aren't going well. At first, it confused him slightly, but only for a moment. Then he quickly realized where his mistake came from. His knowledge of the Spectre X nano bracelet came from his future memories. In the future, the Spectre X series had become one of the most popular pieces of combat equipment among hunters. Practically every high-ranking hunter either owned one or wanted one. But that popularity had not happened immediately. The version currently being sold was still the first generation. And according to what Kale remembered, the first generation had been considered a commercial failure for several years. The biggest issue was the transformation system. The first generation model could only transform into one fixed armor form pre-programmed into the bracelet itself. That severely limited adaptability in actual combat situations. Worse still, the price was absurdly high compared to conventional armor of the same rank. To most hunters, it simply looked like an overpriced suit of armor with extra risks attached to it. Because unlike normal armor, the Spectre X system relied entirely on the bracelet unit itself. And in combat, the arms were naturally one of the most active parts of the body. Meaning if the bracelet got damaged during battle, the entire armor system could fail instantly. That single flaw alone made many hunters unwilling to trust their lives to it. It was only after the second generation version released years later, fixing most of these problems, that the Spectre series truly exploded in popularity. But Kale honestly did not care much about any of that. The reason he wanted it was simple. Convenience. The ability to deploy armor instantly without needing to wear it beforehand was already valuable enough for him. As for the flaws, those could be managed. Money was also not an issue right now. Compared to dying inside some insane tower challenge because he tried to save credits, spending more for survival felt completely reasonable. His thoughts ended there as the suited salesman finally arrived before him. The man's smile was bright and professional. "Sir, are you the customer interested in the Spectre X bracelet?" Kale nodded once. Immediately, the man's smile somehow became even wider, his full white teeth practically shining under the lobby lights. "Excellent choice, sir. The Spectre X is currently the pinnacle of adaptive personal protection technology. It utilizes advanced nanotechnology integrated directly with the hunter's neurological imprint upon activation." The salesman spoke smoothly without missing a beat. Once bonded, the system responds directly to mental commands. The transition between dormant and active armor state takes approximately 2 seconds, allowing near instantaneous deployment during combat situations. He looked ready to continue the sales pitch further, but Kale interrupted before he could. "How much for a Tier 1 bracelet?" The salesman paused briefly, clearly surprised by how direct he was. Still, his professional smile remained intact. 3 million credits, sir. But I assure you, the quality absolutely justifies the PRI. That's fine, Kale cut in calmly. I'll take one. The salesman blinked. For a second, he genuinely looked stunned. Most customers spent hours debating before even considering a purchase like this. Meanwhile, this young man had decided almost instantly. Still, shock quickly transformed into delight. "Excellent choice, sir," he said enthusiastically. "You definitely won't regret it." Kale nodded once before adding, "Though I want a few modifications made first." The salesman looked surprised again, but quickly recovered. "Of course, sir. Please come with me." He immediately led Kale toward the elevator. After traveling several floors upward, they eventually arrived at a far more luxurious section of the building before entering a private customization room. Kale calmly listed the modifications he wanted done to the armor system while the staff recorded everything carefully. Once that was finished, he sat down to wait. The modifications would take some time. The room remained quiet for several minutes before Kale's phone suddenly rang. His brows furrowed slightly as he stared at his screen. An unknown number. Still, he accepted the call. "Hello." A familiar female voice quickly came from the other side. Hello. Zoe. From the hunter exam." Kale immediately remembered her. "Oh, hey." There was a brief pause before he asked, "How did you get my number?" Zoe sounded slightly embarrassed afterward. Adam's father helped us get it. He's kinda capable in that area. I see. His tone remained neutral. Sorry, she added quickly. I told Adam it was kinda weird too, but he insisted. It's fine, Kale replied after a brief pause. Then he got straight to the point. So why were you trying to contact me? Right? About that. Zoe hesitated briefly before continuing. Adam and I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in teaming up for a rift exploration before the association's 1-week beginner permit expires. She continued speaking quickly afterward. We're planning a run in a couple of days, and since you cleared the exam on your first attempt, we figured you probably know what you're doing. A faint, awkward laugh escaped her. And you also seem like a decent person. Kale remained silent for a moment. Honestly, the proposal did not sound bad. Both Zoe and Adam seemed reasonable enough, and they appeared fairly capable as well. Assuming they awakened decent classes with useful class perks, they would probably make reliable temporary teammates. Besides, he had already planned to farm experience points inside a rift soon anyway. Originally, he intended to go solo, but teaming up for the first few runs was not necessarily a bad idea either. Sure, he said finally. Why not? Zoe immediately sounded relieved. Great, then how about 2 days from now? That should give everyone enough time to prepare properly. Works for me. Perfect. I'll send you the location later. All right. The call ended shortly afterward. Not long after that, the customization room door finally opened again. The suited salesman returned while carrying a sleek black bracelet inside a protective case. This is your modified Spectre X, sir. Kale immediately took it. The bracelet itself looked surprisingly simple. Sleek black metal with faint silver lines running across its surface. Without hesitation, he placed it around his wrist. The moment it locked into place, Kale immediately felt something strange. A faint neurological connection. It was difficult to describe properly. The bracelet did not exactly feel like an extension of his body, but it also no longer felt completely separate from him either. He could vaguely sense its systems, its functions, its dormant state waiting for activation. Without hesitation, Kale mentally issued the command. The next moment, black liquid-like nanomaterial suddenly erupted from the bracelet and rapidly spread across his arm. The speed was astonishing. Within roughly 2 or less seconds, his entire body had become covered in sleek black armor. Even his head was fully enclosed. But surprisingly, his vision was not obstructed at all. The instant the helmet sealed shut, the internal visual system activated automatically. A holographic display appeared across his field of vision, clean and sharp without feeling intrusive. Environmental data, distance markers, and surrounding movement instantly became visible with incredible clarity. Kale's eyes widened slightly. Damn! The armor looked incredible. But more importantly, it felt incredible. Lightweight, flexible, comfortable, and despite that, he could clearly feel how durable the material itself was. Honestly, if not for the outrageous price and the flaws of the first-generation system, the Spectre X probably would have already become massively popular. Still, that did not matter to Kale. He deactivated the armor shortly afterward. The black nanomaterial instantly retreated back into the bracelet until it once again looked completely ordinary. Kale nodded in satisfaction before completing the payment. The moment the transaction finished, however, he immediately felt the emptiness in his account again. He sighed softly. Still, the tower coins and the 3 mithril ores in his possession kept him from feeling truly poor. Though figuring out how to safely convert those into actual money would probably become another headache entirely. But that was a problem for another day. After leaving the Spectre Guild building, Kale booked another transit ride and began heading home. The trip back passed quietly. Eventually, the vehicle stopped before his apartment building. Kale stepped out before heading upstairs. By the time he reached the apartment door, the sky outside had already begun darkening slightly. There were still a few hours left before nightfall, meaning Lyra had not returned yet. After unlocking the door, Kale entered quietly before heading straight toward his room. The moment his body touched the bed, exhaustion instantly crashed into him. and almost immediately afterward he fell asleep. A/N. Hey readers, I know it's been tough to keep up with my slow chapter release rate, and that's entirely on me. I promise I'm not doing it intentionally. I've had a lot on my plate lately, which has kept me from writing as much as I'd like. I'll do my best to start publishing more regularly, ideally daily. In the meantime, if you're enjoying the story, please don't forget to vote for the book. Your comments and reviews also mean a lot to me, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Kale slowly opened his eyes. The room was dark and quiet, illuminated only by the faint glow of distant city lights leaking through the curtains. For a few seconds, he simply lay there without moving before lazily reaching around the bed for his phone. After fumbling around for a bit, his fingers finally found it. The screen lit up the moment he turned it on. 0:17. A little past midnight. Kale yawned softly as he stretched his body, his muscles feeling slightly stiff from the sudden wake-up. Then he sat up slowly before getting off the bed. The moment his feet touched the floor, his stomach let out a low growl. He paused. Right. Now that he thought about it, he had not eaten anything proper since morning. If he was about to enter the tower again, going in hungry was probably a terrible idea. With that in mind, Kale quietly left his room, making sure to keep his movements as silent as possible to avoid disturbing Lyra's sleep. The apartment remained still and peaceful as he entered the kitchen. Without wasting much time, he quickly threw together a simple sandwich and ate it while leaning lightly against the counter. Once he finished, he cleaned everything up immediately afterward before heading back toward his room. This time, once he entered, he did not immediately prepare to enter the tower. Instead, he sat quietly at the edge of his bed. The room was silent. His eyes remained lowered slightly as he organized his thoughts. The previous trial replayed itself briefly inside his mind. The cliff, the spiders, the constant pressure of death breathing down his neck. Even now, thinking about it still felt ridiculous. After sitting there for several minutes, Kale finally exhaled slowly before standing up. Time to prepare. He removed his casual clothes before putting on the combat suit he had bought earlier. At first glance, the white outfit looked almost identical to ordinary fabric clothing, simple and lightweight without anything particularly special about its appearance. But appearances were deceiving. This was actually an additional layer that came together with the Spectre X nano bracelet system. A combat suit designed specifically to be worn beneath the nano armor. The material itself was woven using silk extracted from web spinner spiders, making it far tougher than normal fabric. It could withstand low-level attacks on its own and offered impressive durability despite how light it felt. Honestly, compared to the cheap second-hand leather gear he used during the previous trial, this thing was superior in almost every way. Once everything was ready, Kale stood still for a moment. Then he willed it. Enter tower. The world around him immediately distorted. His room dissolved apart like fragments of shattered glass before his surroundings rapidly reconstructed themselves once more. The familiar start room materialized around him. Cold brick walls. Dull atmosphere. The same boring enclosed space as always. The moment Kale fully arrived, he immediately noticed a small figure flying toward him energetically. Ona. Good day, Challenger. Welcome back to the tower. Kale looked toward the tiny floating guide spirit before giving a small nod. Hey there, Aona. He narrowed his eyes slightly. You seem unusually cheerful today. Something good happen? Aona immediately brightened further. Yes, she said excitedly. Because your previous trial performance was rated as outstanding, my authority index increased a little. Kale blinked. Oh, Ona nodded rapidly. I can now expand the start room dimensions by a few centimeters. Kale stared at her for a second. Honestly, that was not what he expected. He had assumed authority increases would mostly affect classified information access or something similar. He did not know the start room itself could actually improve too. Still, it was not a bad thing. That's good, he said casually. Aona immediately beamed even brighter at the praise. It was almost painfully obvious she enjoyed being complimented. Kale looked around the empty room briefly before speaking again. Oh right, you mentioned before that you'd eventually be able to decorate this place. Ona blinked. Yeah. Then you probably should. Kale shrugged lightly. Since you're stuck spending all your time here, you might as well make the place livable. For a moment, Aona simply stared at him. Then her expression softened slightly. Thanks for caring about me, she said quietly. Kale looked at her for a second before simply nodding. Then, with a single thought, a notification screen appeared before him. Begin second trial? Yes/no. Kale selected yes without hesitation. Immediately, the start room dissolved once more. The surroundings twisted and reconstructed rapidly around him until a completely different environment formed. Kale found himself standing inside a massive crater. The ground beneath his feet was rough and uneven, filled with cracks and scorched stone. Surrounding the crater itself were the ruins of what looked like a destroyed civilization. Broken structures, collapsed pillars, fragments of ancient walls. And within the crater, goblins. Dozens of them. Small green creatures wandered throughout the area carrying crude weapons while growling among themselves. The moment the environment fully stabilized, another notification screen appeared before Kale. Floor 2. Hell difficulty. Mission. The Reversal Pit. Objective. Eliminate all targets. Combat rule. All non-lethal hits heal the target for 50% of damage dealt. One-shot kills only. Targets remaining. 50. Kale stared at the screen for a moment. Then he sighed. The tower is really at it again. This challenge was absurd in its own way. Every attack had to kill in one strike. If his attack failed to deal enough damage, even by a tiny margin, not only would the enemy survive, but the damage would instead heal them for half the amount inflicted. Meaning every mistake would actively make the enemies harder to kill. Dangerous. Very dangerous. But strangely enough, Kale smiled. Compared to what he had been expecting after the spider nightmare from the previous trial, this was actually manageable. He was confident in his offensive capability. As long as he landed properly lethal strikes, the difficulty itself was not impossible. Honestly, he had half expected the tower to force him into something completely insane again. Like climbing another cliff while bloodthirsty monsters chased him from behind. So this was acceptable. Without hesitation, Kale reached into his inventory and pulled out one of the weapons he had purchased earlier. A blade. The weight immediately settled comfortably into his grip. Compared to the generic weapon issued by the tower previously, this sword felt significantly better balanced and far more reliable. The moment the blade appeared, the goblins finally noticed him. Several pairs of yellow eyes snapped toward his direction. The creatures immediately began shrieking aggressively. But Kale had no intention of giving them the initiative. He moved first. His body shot forward across the crater floor with explosive speed. The nearest goblin barely had time to react before Kale's blade descended. Clean slash. The sword carved deep into the creature's neck instantly. Blood sprayed. The goblin collapsed before it could even scream properly. Targets remaining. 49. Kale glanced at the notification before smiling slightly. This is going to be easier than I thought. 2 more goblins rushed him from the side almost immediately. The first swung wildly with a rusted club. Kale dodged smoothly, using the opening to drive his blade downward straight through the goblin's upper back and into its chest. Instant kill. Before he even fully pulled the blade free, the second goblin lunged toward him screaming. Kale stepped backward without wasting movement. At the same time, another goblin charged from his blind side. His sword thrust forward instantly. The blade pierced directly through the creature's throat. Dead. He ripped the sword free and immediately transitioned into a downward diagonal slash. Another goblin split open across the chest before collapsing lifelessly onto the ground. Kale exhaled lightly. 4 down, he muttered while looking toward the remaining goblins rushing toward him. 46 more to go. But instead of panic, what surged through him was excitement. His blood was pumping. Adrenaline coursed violently through his body. The battle had only just begun. Kale moved through the battlefield with smooth efficiency. Swing. Slash. Stab. Every movement flowed naturally into the next as goblins continued dropping around him one after another. His blade carved through flesh and bone cleanly without hesitation, each strike carrying enough force to guarantee death instantly. There was no wasted movement, no unnecessary flourish. Every attack was precise and lethal. Kale remained fully aware of the trial condition the entire time. He had a strong feeling that the quality of his kills would heavily affect his final rating, which meant he could not afford mistakes. Every strike needed to kill in one hit. Anything less would only heal the target instead. Fortunately, things were going far smoother than he expected. Honestly, even Kale himself felt slightly surprised. Although he had been confident in his offensive ability, he seemed to have underestimated himself a little. But thinking about it carefully, it made sense. It had only been a single day since his awakening, and yet he was already level 8. That alone was ridiculous. Not only that, but his class granted an absurdly high stat increase per level. His physical abilities had already risen to a point where even he was struggling to mentally adjust to the changes properly. Only now, in the middle of actual combat, was he beginning to truly understand how much stronger he had become. A goblin rushed toward him screaming. Kale stepped forward instead of retreating. His sword flashed. The goblin's head separated cleanly from its shoulders. Another one lunged from the side. Kale twisted slightly and drove his blade directly through its eye socket before ripping the weapon free in one fluid motion. Blood splattered across the crater floor. Then suddenly, a sharp sense of danger surged through him. Without hesitation, Kale bent his body downward instantly. The next moment, an arrow whizzed past the space where his head had been moments earlier. Kale frowned. Archers. His eyes immediately locked onto the backline where 3 goblin archers stood among the ruins with crude bows raised. Annoying. Reaching them directly would require cutting through the remaining goblins first. But why would he bother doing that? He had prepared for situations like this already. Without slowing down, Kale shifted his sword into his left hand. At the same time, his right hand reached into his inventory. A metallic glint flashed. The next moment, a short throwing spear appeared in his grip. Kale threw it instantly with everything he had. The spear exploded forward with terrifying speed. One of the goblin archers barely had time to widen its eyes before the weapon pierced straight through its chest and pinned it violently against the ruined stone behind it. Instant death. But Kale did not relax. The brief moment he used to eliminate the archer had already allowed several goblins to close the distance. One came at him swinging wildly. Kale sidestepped and cut horizontally. The goblin's upper body separated instantly. Another rushed him from behind while screaming. Kale spun and drove the sword downward through its skull. Dead. An arrow suddenly shot toward him again. Kale tilted his head slightly just enough for it to miss before immediately charging another goblin and cutting it down with a diagonal slash. The slaughter continued. Several minutes passed in a blur of blood and steel. Kale continued fighting while carefully avoiding the remaining archers' attacks. Then, the moment another opening appeared, he immediately pulled another throwing spear from his inventory and launched it. The second archer died instantly. Not long afterward, the third followed. By the time the final archer collapsed, only 4 goblins remained alive within the crater. Kale exhaled slowly while tightening his grip on the sword. Then he moved. For attacks. For clean kills. The final goblin collapsed lifelessly onto the ruined ground. The battlefield fell silent. A notification screen immediately appeared before him. Trial complete. Performance. All targets eliminated. Non-lethal hits landed. 0. One-shot kills. 50. Rating, S+. Rewards. Plus 1,200 tower coins. Plus 1,680 EXP. Item drop. F-rank Goblin Commander's Seal. Then another screen appeared almost instantly afterward. Infinite Reward Multiplier. Activated. Multiplier. X87. Rewards adjusted. Plus 104,400 tower coins. Plus 146,160 EXP. Item upgraded. F-rank Goblin Commander's Seal D-rank Seal of Reversal. You've leveled up X18. The moment the final notification appeared, Kale suddenly felt an overwhelming surge of power explode throughout his body. His knees instantly buckled. Kale crashed onto the ground violently as unbearable pain tore through him. GHK. His body spasmed uncontrollably. It felt as though something was shredding him apart from the inside. Unlike the previous level-ups that had only brought warm waves of strengthening energy, this one was completely different. 18 levels at once. The increase in strength was simply too massive. The violent energy flooding through his body felt like it was tearing apart his muscles, bones, nerves, and organs before rebuilding them all over again. Pain surged endlessly through him. Time itself seemed to lose meaning. All Kale could feel was agony. Pure, overwhelming agony. It felt like his entire body was being ripped apart piece by piece. Slowly, though, the pain began easing. The violent energy gradually softened, turning warmer and gentler as it spread throughout his body. The sensation slowly shifted from destruction to restoration. Kale could feel his body recovering, healing, becoming stronger. Little by little, the pain faded away completely. Then finally, Kale slowly opened his eyes. His body still ached intensely, but he immediately realized he was no longer inside the crater. He had already been returned to the start room. Kale let out a slow breath before forcing himself upright. Then he froze. What the hell? His eyes slowly scanned the room around him. Was this even still the same start room? When he told Aona to decorate the place however she liked, he admittedly had not expected much. But this was something else entirely. The entire room practically screamed girly aesthetics. Not subtly either. Aggressively. The once dull gray walls had been repainted bright pink and decorated with various cute patterns. The harsh artificial lighting was gone, replaced by soft glowing mana lamps shaped like flowers. At the corner of the room sat a pink bed overflowing with cushions. Everything was pink. Painfully pink. Kale stared silently at the room for several long seconds. Then his eyes landed on what looked like a tiny birdhouse sitting nearby. Except it was slightly larger than a normal birdhouse and looked more like a miniature mansion. Just then, the tiny door suddenly swung open. Aona flew out from inside cheerfully. You're finally awake. Kale slowly turned his gaze away from the horrifying decoration choices and focused on the more important issue instead. How long was I out? Aona floated closer before answering. You appeared here around 15 minutes ago. Her expression became slightly more serious. You looked like you were going through some kind of painful evolution process, so I decided not to disturb you. Kale blinked slightly. That was thoughtful of you. But internally, his thoughts had already become heavy. 15 minutes. That was dangerous. Extremely dangerous. Never in his life had Kale imagined he would someday consider leveling up a dangerous thing. It was not that he regretted growing stronger. Far from it. Even after experiencing that horrifying pain, he still wanted more strength. But the problem was the timing. What if something like this happened in the middle of combat? The implications were terrifying. Imagine becoming completely incapacitated during a life-and-death battle. Even a few seconds could get someone killed. But 15 whole minutes? That was practically suicide. Thankfully, inside the tower, all rewards and experience were distributed only after the trial ended. But outside, Kale suddenly felt a headache coming on. What if he was inside a rift fighting monsters when this happened? What if he suddenly gained a massive amount of EXP mid-battle and collapsed helplessly while surrounded by beasts? His expression became increasingly complicated, especially after remembering something important. He had already agreed to team up with Zoe and Adam for a rift exploration. Kale sighed softly. He did not want to cancel on them. Breaking promises left a bad taste in his mouth. But at the same time, the problem in front of him was not something he could casually ignore either. After thinking about it for a while, Kale eventually shook his head. There was no point worrying about it right now. He would deal with that issue later. For now, it was time to see just how much stronger he had become. But just as Kale was about to summon his status screen, Aona suddenly floated closer toward him. Her tiny face was filled with obvious anticipation. So? She asked enthusiastically. What do you think about the design? Kale blinked once. Aona gestured proudly toward the room around them. I did some research regarding human living spaces, and apparently pink appears very frequently in descriptions of comfort and happiness, so I decided to go with that theme. She turned back toward him with sparkling eyes. What do you think? Kale slowly looked around the room again. Pink walls, pink lighting, pink bed, pink everything. The entire place radiated overwhelming feminine energy so aggressively that he almost felt mentally attacked just standing there. Then his gaze returned toward Aona. The tiny guide spirit was staring at him with bright, hopeful eyes, looking almost exactly like a child waiting to be praised after proudly showing off something they worked hard on. Kale stared at her for a few seconds. Then he silently decided to keep his true thoughts to himself. He gave a small shrug. It's all right. Immediately, Aona beamed brightly. I knew you'd like it. Kale sighed internally but kept a calm expression outwardly. Instead, he shifted the conversation elsewhere. I want to attempt the next trial in one go, he said. But before that, I need some time to train and get used to my new strength. Aona quickly nodded. Okay then. After saying that, she floated back toward the miniature pink house sitting at the corner of the room before disappearing inside it. The tiny door shut behind her. Kale finally turned his attention back toward himself. All right, he muttered quietly. Time to see how strong I've gotten. He could already feel it. The changes inside his body were massive. 18 levels at once was absurd. The pain had been hellish, but the amount of strength he gained from it was equally ridiculous. Without hesitation, Kale summoned his status screen. The familiar translucent blue interface appeared before him instantly. Name: Kale Voss. Title: Class: Void Sovereign. Class perks: Void Absorption, Null Field, Sovereign Claim, Echo Strike. Skills: Level: 26, 66%. Health: 2306. Mana: 1740. Stats: Strength: 71. Agility: 70. Endurance: 91. Intelligence: 116. Vitality: 87. Constitution: 65. Stat points: 75. ATC balance: 12,457,400. Talent: Infinite Reward Multiplier. Kale stared at the screen silently. Then he slowly nodded to himself. Yeah. This was insane. His level had jumped from 8 all the way to 26, and his stats had practically doubled. The increase in power was absurd. But surprisingly, the thing that caught his attention the most was not the stats themselves. It was another section entirely. The skill tab that had appeared on his status screen. Kale's breathing paused slightly. A skill tree. His eyes narrowed. That should not have happened yet. Normally, awakened individuals did not unlock their skill tree until far later. Around level 50 at the earliest from what he remembered. But his had already awakened now. Kale quickly focused on the information, and the moment he saw it his eyes widened slightly. The skill tree had awakened at level 20. That was unbelievably early, and more importantly incredibly beneficial. Currently, he only had one available skill slot, but the next would unlock at level 40, then another at level 60. The pattern continued like that. The earlier someone awakened their skill tree, the earlier future slots would become available as well. Which meant his advantage here was enormous. Most awakened individuals spent a huge portion of their growth relying almost entirely on class perks because they lacked actual skill slots. Even after eventually unlocking skills, the low number of available slots heavily limited their versatility. But Kale would not suffer that problem nearly as badly. A slow grin spread across his face. Then another, until eventually he could not hold it back anymore. Ha ha ha. A low laugh escaped him. Then it became louder. Every single day since awakening, his growth had become more and more ridiculous. At this point, even he was beginning to feel shocked by himself. After calming down slightly, Kale dismissed the status screen. Now came the important part, actually testing his strength. Stats alone were ultimately just numbers on a screen. Reading them of the screen was one thing. Experiencing what the numbers actually translates to personally was another entirely. Kale slowly clenched his fist. Then he immediately began training. The first thing he tested was speed. He lowered his stance slightly before dashing forward. The result shocked him instantly. The sudden burst of speed exploded far beyond what he expected, and before Kale could properly react, bang! His body slammed directly into the opposite side of the start room. Pain shot through him immediately. Ugh! Kale groaned softly while rubbing his shoulder. This is gonna take a while to get used to. Without wasting time, he immediately stood back up. Again. Time passed rapidly afterward. Kale continued experimenting with his new physical abilities relentlessly. Speed, strength, reaction time, movement control. He tested everything. Several times he nearly lost balance from moving too quickly. Other times he accidentally applied too much force and almost launched himself across the room. But gradually he began adapting. 40 minutes passed before he even realized it. Kale now lay sprawled flat on the floor, staring silently at the pink ceiling above him. Over the last 40 minutes, he had pushed himself hard while testing the limits of his current capabilities. He had not held back either. There was no point. The start room itself was absurdly durable. Even with his current strength, he could not leave so much as a visible dent on the walls. So he had gone all out during training. And thanks to that, he now had a much clearer understanding of what he was capable of. Still, Kale did not immediately rush toward the next trial afterward. Instead, he simply continued lying there quietly. Not because he was tired. Far from it. With his current stats, a mere 40 minutes of training was nowhere near enough to physically exhaust him. No, he was resting his mind instead. Resetting himself mentally. Right now, adrenaline was still surging through him from the excitement of discovering just how powerful he had become. And that was dangerous. Very dangerous. The previous trial had already felt relatively easy to him. Now he was even stronger than before. If he entered the next trial while overflowing with confidence, there was a high chance he would begin to underestimate the tower trials. And Kale knew better than anyone how dangerous overconfidence could become. The hell difficulty trials were bizarre, unpredictable, completely unreasonable. Entering carelessly while drunk on confidence was practically equivalent to speeding toward his own doom. So he waited. Time passed quietly inside the pink start room. Kale simply stared at the ceiling in silence while slowly calming his thoughts. Eventually, though, he finally sat up, then slowly rose to his feet. His expression gradually became calm once more. It was time to challenge the next tower floor. The moment Kale confirmed moving to the next trial, the start room vanished around him once again. The familiar brick walls dissolved into fragments of light before an entirely new environment began forming around him. A soft breeze brushed against his skin. Then the world stabilized. Kale slowly looked around. For a brief moment, he genuinely thought he had arrived in some kind of paradise. Massive trees stretched endlessly across the landscape, their leaves lush and vibrantly green. Colorful flowers bloomed everywhere beneath them, filling the forest with life and beauty. Hanging from nearly every branch were fruits of all kinds. Some looked familiar, others completely foreign, but all of them looked perfectly ripe and unbelievably fresh. Red fruits glistened beneath the soft light overhead. Golden ones hung heavily from branches while others carried strange colors Kale had never seen before. The sweet fragrance filling the forest was intoxicating. The combined scent of flowers and fruits created an atmosphere so pleasant it almost felt unreal. And that was exactly why Kale immediately felt danger. A faint chill crept down his spine. This place was too perfect. Far too perfect. And the notification screen that appeared next only confirmed his suspicion. Floor 3. Hell difficulty. Mission. Survival. Objective. Endure the hunger forest. Warning. The gnawing hunger will corrode your mind. Some fruits may provide temporary relief. Choose carefully. Duration. 2 hours. Kale stared at the screen with narrowed eyes. This trial is dangerous. No monsters. No combat. But somehow this felt even worse. A mental attack. The warning itself already explained enough. The hunger would slowly corrode his mind. As for the fruits, some could apparently help alleviate the effect temporarily. But the problem was obvious. How was he supposed to figure out which fruits were safe? Kale had a feeling eating the wrong one would end up very badly for him. Almost immediately after the notification disappeared, Kale felt it. Hunger. A faint gnawing sensation began spreading through his stomach. His expression instantly darkened. Fuck! He had literally eaten before entering the tower. And yet right now, it felt as though he had not eaten in an entire day. Worse still, the sensation was rapidly growing stronger. Kale immediately activated the Spectre X bracelet. The AI system responded instantly. Without hesitation, he began scanning the nearest fruits hanging from the tree closest to him. A few seconds later, the result appeared. Normal. No toxins. No detectable harmful substances. Kale frowned slightly before moving toward another tree and scanning again. Same result. Then another tree. And another. And another. By the time he stopped, he had already scanned fruits from 5 different trees. Every single result came back identical. Completely normal. Kale's brows furrowed deeply. There was no way it was that simple. Either the AI simply could not detect whatever abnormality existed within the fruits, or the fruits genuinely were normal, and the tower mechanism itself was what determined the effect after consumption. Either possibility was bad, and neither eased his worries. Seeing that the scans were useless, Kale quickly shifted his approach. If there were truly fruits capable of helping him, then the trial itself should logically contain some kind of clue or loophole that allowed challengers to identify them. There had to be something. Pattern. A hidden sign. Anything. But as Kale looked around, all he saw was an endless forest overflowing with beautiful trees and tempting fruits. No markings. No monuments. Nothing obvious at all. Meanwhile, the hunger continued growing worse. Minute by minute, the gnawing sensation intensified. Kale could feel it slowly affecting his thoughts already. Without wasting any more time, he began moving through the forest. He searched carefully while trying to identify anything unusual. Anything at all. But no matter how far he walked, the scenery remained the same. Endless trees. Endless fruits. Endless sweet fragrance. And the hunger only continued worsening. Soon, Kale suddenly stopped walking. His expression shifted slightly. A thought had just appeared inside his mind. What if the AI scans had actually been correct? What if there truly was nothing wrong with the fruits themselves? The notification had never explicitly stated that the other fruits were poisonous. It only said some fruits could relieve the hunger, not that the others would harm him. Kale's eyes widened slightly. Then suddenly, he snapped out of his thoughts, only to realize his hand had already unconsciously reached toward a nearby fruit. His expression immediately changed. Shit! He quickly pulled his hand back. This was bad. Very bad. The hunger was already affecting his judgment. If he had not noticed in time, he might have eaten the fruit without even realizing it. Kale immediately backed away from the tree. But the problem was, where exactly was he supposed to go? The entire forest was filled with massive fruit-bearing trees. The sweet smell lingered everywhere no matter where he moved. It was inescapable. Kale clenched his jaw. At this point, he had already given up on trying to locate the so-called helpful fruits. There simply was not enough information. Eventually, he found a relatively open spot that was farther away from the surrounding trees compared to most areas. Although even there, the scent of the fruits still drifted through the air constantly. Kale slowly lowered himself into a cross-legged position before closing his eyes. He began trying to calm his breathing while forcing his mind into focus, attempting every meditation and concentration technique he could vaguely remember. But none of it worked. The hunger only continued worsening relentlessly, becoming sharper, heavier, and more unbearable with every passing moment. At some point, it genuinely began feeling as though he might starve to death right there despite his stomach technically not being empty. Kale's thoughts raced desperately. He had no idea how much time had passed already, but he was certain the 2-hour duration was nowhere near over. At this rate, he was not sure he could endure until the end. Then suddenly, an idea surfaced inside his mind. The health potions. They were not food, but they contained vitality and restorative energy. Maybe that could help suppress the hunger somewhat. Without hesitation, Kale reached into his inventory and pulled out a vial containing a health potion, then immediately drank it. The cool liquid slid down his throat smoothly. First, nothing happened, but moments later, warmth spread throughout his body. And just like that, the unbearable hunger weakened slightly. Kale let out a slow breath. Better. The effect was not perfect, but it helped. A lot. So Kale remained seated there quietly while enduring the trial. Time passed slowly. Roughly 11 minutes later, the effect wore off. The hunger returned instantly with frightening intensity. Kale groaned softly as the gnawing sensation assaulted him again. Without hesitation, he drank another potion. Once again, relief came, but this time, the effect only lasted around 8 minutes. Kale's expression darkened. The effectiveness is decreasing, which meant if he mindlessly continued chugging potions non-stop, eventually they would stop working entirely. And when that happened, he would be finished. So Kale made a decision. He would endure the hunger as long as possible each time before drinking another potion. That way, he could stretch out the effects for as long as possible. And so the cycle continued. The hunger grew. His mind slowly weakened. Then he drank a potion to suppress it temporarily before enduring again. Over and over. Time gradually lost meaning. The hunger became maddening. At some point, Kale could have sworn he saw movement deeper within the forest despite there clearly being nothing there. Hallucinations had already begun. His thoughts became sluggish. His breathing roughened, and every passing minute started feeling unbearably long. Then another potion. Then more suffering. Again and again, until finally the 2-hour mark arrived. And just like that, Kale survived yet another hell difficulty trial. Trial complete. Rating, A+. Rewards, plus 3,000 tower coins, plus 3 intelligence, plus 5 endurance. Infinite reward multiplier, activated. Multiplier, X9, rewards adjusted. Plus 27,000 tower coins, plus 27 intelligence, plus 45 endurance. Kale barely spared the notification screen a glance before dismissing it immediately. He slowly pushed himself to his feet, though his body still trembled faintly. The hunger was gone now that the trial had ended, but the lingering psychological effects remained. Even after surviving it, Kale could still feel traces of that maddening starvation clawing at the back of his mind. The forest around him slowly dissolved into motes of light, and moments later he reappeared back inside the start room. Kale did not linger there for even a second. He immediately grabbed the 2 unopened reward boxes and tossed them into his inventory before willing himself out of the tower. Aona did not even get the chance to congratulate him before he vanished. The start room disappeared. Then the next moment, Kale found himself back inside his apartment room. He immediately checked the time on his phone. 6:55 a.m. The sun was already beginning to rise outside, and faint sounds of the waking city could already be heard through the window. But Kale barely noticed any of it, because at that exact moment, a sweet aroma drifted into his nose. Food. Before he could even consciously react, his body had already moved. Kale practically burst out of his room and headed straight toward the kitchen, drawn entirely by instinct. The moment he spotted the covered plate sitting on the table, he descended on it immediately. The lingering mental imprint left behind by the hunger forest still clung heavily to him. He was already halfway through the food before his rationality finally caught up. Kale slowly froze, then raised his head. His mouth was still stuffed full of food. Across the table, Lyra sat staring at him with an extremely complicated expression. Silence filled the kitchen. Kale felt his cheeks heat up slightly in embarrassment. Slowly, he forced himself to calm down before chewing and swallowing the food in his mouth. "Hey!" he greeted awkwardly. "Good morning. I didn't notice you were there earlier." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," she replied calmly. "I noticed." Kale somehow felt even more embarrassed hearing that. He coughed lightly before trying to explain himself. "So, you see, I didn't really get anything to eat, and the tower trial drained me pretty badly, so I was feeling extremely famished." "Oh, is that so?" Lyra said slowly. Her gaze drifted meaningfully toward Kale's plate, which had somehow already been reduced to half its original amount within seconds. The suspicion in her eyes was obvious. Still, she did not press further. Instead, she simply returned her attention to her own food. She had originally been eating peacefully before Kale suddenly stormed into the kitchen and started devouring food like a starving beast. Soon, both of them quietly resumed eating. Several minutes later, the meal finally ended. Kale leaned back slightly in his chair while Lyra focused on her phone screen, both of them doing their absolute best to ignore the awkward atmosphere lingering between them. Especially Lyra. She seemed determined to erase the image she had just witnessed from her memory entirely. Eventually, Kale broke the silence first. "So, what are you doing today?" Lyra finally looked up from her phone. "I plan on doing my tower tutorial today," she said. "I've already made all my preparations, so I think today's the day." Kale nodded. "That's good." Then Lyra asked, "What about you? Doing another tower run today?" Kale shook his head. "No." He leaned back slightly before continuing. "I'm taking a couple days off before entering again." He was not lying either. The previous trial had been rough. Very rough. Even without physical injuries, the mental strain from the hunger forest was still lingering heavily inside him. He needed time to recover properly. Besides, tomorrow was already the day he agreed to explore a rift with Zoe and Adam. He still needed to figure out how to deal with the leveling issue before then. So taking today off from the tower was honestly the best option. Hearing his answer, Lyra visibly relaxed. "Wow," she said. "Someone's actually being careful for once." Kale shrugged. "Can't help it." Then he smirked slightly. "Who else is supposed to take care of my cute little sister if something happens to me?" Lyra instantly turned red. "You!" She muttered curses under her breath while quickly standing up and grabbing the plates before heading toward the kitchen sink. Kale could not help chuckling quietly. Seriously, she was just too cute. After a moment, he also stood up and followed after her. "Oh right," he said casually. "I've been thinking maybe we should move." Lyra paused slightly. Kale continued. "Maybe somewhere better. A better district, a better apartment. Stuff like that." The moment he said that, Lyra suddenly froze. Then after a few seconds, she quietly spoke without turning around. "Why would we move?" Kale blinked slightly. "I like it here," she continued softly. Then after a brief pause, she added, "It's home." Kale frowned slightly. "But this apartment is old. And the ambient mana in this third-tier district. We're awakened." Lyra interrupted him before he could finish. "Well, you already are. And by the end of today, I will be too." She slowly turned toward him. "You know, ambient mana barely affects awakened people." Then her expression softened slightly. "And Mom is in a hospital here. We can't just leave her." Kale replied, "We can transfer her to another hospital." But Lyra immediately shook her head. "No." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I don't want us to do that." Kale paused. Honestly, he had expected Lyra to love the idea of moving, especially considering everything currently happening at the hospital with the director situation. He genuinely thought the idea of relocating somewhere better while transferring their mother to a safer hospital would make her happy. Apparently not. Still, Kale did not push the issue further. Lyra was an extremely reasonable person. If she felt this strongly about staying, then there was probably a reason behind it. Besides, for Kale personally, moving was not really important right now. All he truly cared about was climbing the tower, becoming stronger, earning money, and protecting the people he cared about. Everything else was secondary. Eventually, he sighed softly. "All right, we'll stay then." Lyra visibly relaxed slightly. "Thank you for understanding." Kale simply nodded before leaving her to finish washing the dishes. He returned to his room shortly afterward. The moment he entered, he removed the combat suit and changed into comfortable home clothes before collapsing directly onto the bed. Almost immediately, he fell asleep. Time passed quietly. Eventually, Kale slowly woke up again. Sunlight now streamed brightly through the window, and the city outside had become far livelier compared to earlier in the morning. Kale sat up slowly before leaving his room to get a drink of water. After quenching his thirst, he returned to his room once more and sat quietly at the edge of the bed. Then his eyes narrowed slightly. It was finally time to open the unclaimed rewards from the last two trials. Without wasting any time, Kale summoned the two reward boxes from his inventory. The next moment, both boxes materialized before him simultaneously. Almost immediately, a notification screen appeared before his eyes. Do you want to claim the reward? Yes/no. Kale did not hesitate and immediately selected yes. The next moment, a string of notifications flooded his vision. Rewards claimed. Plus 20,500 tower coins. Plus 1 skill book, common grade. Plus 20 stat points. Infinite reward multiplier, activated. Multiplier, x100, rewards adjusted. Plus 2,050,000 tower coins. Plus 1 skill book, uncommon grade. Plus 2,000 stat points. Kale stared at the screen for a moment before nodding slowly. Not bad. The additional 2 million tower coins immediately pushed his balance beyond 14 million. But compared to the coins, his attention shifted more toward the other rewards. The skill book. It had arrived at the perfect time. He had only just unlocked his first skill slot, and now he conveniently received a skill book alongside it. Earlier, he had already been considering buying one himself, but now that problem had solved itself. Then his gaze shifted toward the final reward. 2,000 stat points. Kale could not help shaking his head slightly. That number was simply absurd. Even all his current stats combined were nowhere near that amount, yet he had just casually obtained 2,000 free stat points from opening reward boxes. The growth rate of his strength was honestly becoming ridiculous. A grin slowly spread across his face. I really am built different. The narcissistic smile on his face widened slightly before he lightly smacked his own cheek. All right, calm down. His gaze returned toward the screen again. Now came the important part. He fully intended to use the stat points immediately, but before that, he needed to make sure he was somewhere safe. The memory of what happened after leveling up 18 times earlier was still fresh in his mind. Assigning 2,000 stat points at once could easily produce a similar reaction. Maybe even worse. So instead of remaining on the bed, Kale climbed down and sat directly on the open floor of his room. If another violent surge of strength happened, at least he would not accidentally destroy furniture around him. Once seated properly, he opened his status screen again. His eyes locked onto the massive pool of unassigned stat points. Then, without wasting time, he immediately distributed 300 points into each stat. The moment he confirmed it, a violent surge of energy exploded throughout his body. Kale instantly gritted his teeth. A frightening amount of strength flooded through him all at once, making every muscle in his body tighten painfully. Luckily, this time was nowhere near as bad as the level up earlier. He did not lose consciousness. Still, the sensation felt horrible. It was almost like his entire body was being pressure cooked from the inside. Fortunately, the pain only lasted for a short while before slowly easing apart. Even then, Kale did not immediately move. He could feel overwhelming strength coursing through every inch of his body right now. It genuinely felt like even the slightest careless movement might break something accidentally. So instead, he remained seated quietly while reopening his status screen. Name: Kale Voss. Title: Class: Void Sovereign. Class perks: Void Absorption, Null Field, Sovereign Claim, Echo Strike. Skills: Level: 26, 66%. Health: 11,306. Mana: 6,645. Stats: Strength: 371. Agility, 370. Endurance, 436. Intelligence, 443. Vitality, 387. Constitution, 365. Air stat points, 275. ATC balance, 14,534,400. Talent, infinite reward multiplier. Kale stared at the screen quietly before a slow smile spread across his face. Who would believe that these were the stats of someone who had not even been awakened for up to a week yet? Even those who awakened a year before him usually did not possess stats anywhere close to this level. Yet he had achieved it within days. At this rate, wouldn't he eventually become one of the legendary S-rank hunters? Those beings stood at the absolute top of the world's food chain. Wealth, power, influence, fame, they possessed everything. Every awakened individual dreamed of reaching that level someday. But now, Kale no longer felt satisfied with just S-rank. Maybe it was too ambitious, arrogant even. But why shouldn't he aim higher? His tutorial rating had reached SSS rank. That fact alone already proved one thing clearly. S-rank was not the limit. And perhaps even SSS rank was not the true pinnacle either. There were probably even greater heights beyond that. And Kale fully intended to reach them. His confidence in that fact was absolute. After a while, his gaze shifted back toward the remaining stat points. There were still over 200 left unassigned, but Kale chose not to touch them for now. At the moment, he still lacked a proper combat style. His future self had basically fought however he could survive. There had never been structure or specialization behind it. But Kale did not want to continue down that same path this time. He wanted to eventually create a combat system suited specifically for himself. So keeping extra stat points available for future adjustments was the smarter decision. Eventually, his attention shifted toward the skill tab. The single skill slot he had unlocked was still empty. But not for long. Without hesitation, Kale reached into his inventory and retrieved the skill book. Despite the name, it was not actually a book. It looked more like a scroll. Kale quickly checked its description. Skill book, uncommon grade. When used, awakens a random skill ranging from F tier to D+ tier. Kale nodded slightly. Not bad at all. Without hesitation, he activated it. Immediately, another notification appeared before him. Skill book detected. Do you want to use it? Yes/no. Kale selected yes. The next moment, the scroll suddenly dissolved apart into countless glowing motes of light. The particles gathered together rapidly before condensing into a single glowing orb that instantly shot toward Kale's forehead. A flood of information entered his mind. Then another notification appeared. Skill learned. Eye of Truth, D rank. But immediately afterward, the screen suddenly glitched. Kale's eyes narrowed instantly. He had seen this happen before, during his tutorial. Fortunately, the distortion only lasted briefly before new notifications appeared. New skill. Eye of Truth is synergizing with active class perk. Infinite reward multiplier. Activated. Under the influence of the multiplier, the new skill is being upgraded. Please wait.